Chapter 175. The Black Dragon had never seen Su Yorong before, but she knew that this person was Su Yorong. The rumors were true. Su Yorong truly was very beautiful, and even she had to admit it. But she had not expected Su Yorong to say such a thing the first time they met. Those words might have sounded rather artistic, but how could she not hear the declaration hidden within? No, there was no concealment. Su Yorong had made no attempt to conceal anything, clearly declaring her ownership of Chen Chongsheng. The rumored pure and holy maiden actually had such a strong possessive desire? The Black Dragon even thought of those vulgar and low-class female dragons on the southern islands and jeered, "Do you want to pee on him?" These words were truly vulgar, but Su Yorong did not get angry. She calmly said, "Perhaps there are other ways to resolve it." The Black Dragon coldly stared at her. "How do you want to resolve it?" Su Yorong glanced at her ankle and indifferently said, "I have no way of removing this seal in a short amount of time, and I also don't want him to always remember this matter and feel even more apologetic towards you. Thus, I've decided that in the future, I'll spend some time with you every day. This way, you won't be lonely and you won't mistakenly think that loneliness is loneliness." The Black Dragon angrily retorted, "I don't need your company. Just looking at you makes me annoyed." Su Yorong smiled. "You're his protector, so I naturally have to take good care of you and thank you." The Black Dragon sneered, "What does that have to do with you? He's my man." Su Yorong did not get angry at these words, nor did she argue. She stroked her black hair and smiled. "Good girl." The Black Dragon was extremely depressed. She desperately shook her head, wanting to escape her grasp, but to no avail. Seeing her like this, Su Yorong happily said, "How cute." The Black Dragon was infuriated and yelled, "I'm going to eat you." Su Yorong smiled. "It's fine as long as you don't think about eating him." The Black Dragon froze for a moment before understanding what she meant. Her face instantly blushed and she spat, "Woman, how could you be so shameless?" "My apologies, sir. I was unable to find the key." Luoluo raised her head and glanced at Chen Chongsheng, somewhat uneasy. This was the highest stone hall in the Imperial City. She had lived here the entire time in White Emperor City. Chen Chongsheng wasn't surprised by this answer, but he was surprised by Luoluo's fear. In the Orthodox Academy, Luoluo had been just as adorable as she was now, but she would never reveal this sort of expression. What exactly happened? Or was it that Madame Mu wanted to marry her off to Shuilao City, and this matter not only hurt her heart, but also made her very afraid? Luoluo glanced at the white crane outside the window. Looking at his expression, she asked cautiously, "Will Shirmu be unhappy?" Chen Chongsheng was startled and asked, "Why is she unhappy?" He truly did not understand why Su Yorong was unhappy, nor did he understand why the little Black Dragon had said that there was something wrong with his head. Seeing his response, Luoluo relaxed a little, but she was still a little nervous. She asked tentatively, "Sir, you won't blame me?" Chen Chongsheng remembered that when Luoluo left the capital, she told him in a letter that she lied to him. In reality, she was the same age as him, only a few months younger. Was she worried that he would blame her for this? Chen Chongsheng was speechless. He turned to her and prepared to say something, but he froze. They had clearly been separated for 5 years, but Luoluo's appearance was still the same, immature and adorable to the extreme, just like a child. What was going on here? Her cultivation level should not have reached this level, or did the demi-human race also have a secret technique similar to South Stream temples to preserve one's appearance? "Sir?" Luoluo softly reminded him. Chen Chongsheng came to his senses and said, "I truly am a little angry." Luoluo nervously thought, could Sir have heard what Xianyuanpa said? Or could it be that he heard what I said? "Sir knows that I like him, so he's angry?" Chen Chongsheng asked, "Since you already heard the news, why didn't you write a letter to the Li Palace asking for reinforcements? I'm your teacher, so I naturally wouldn't abandon you." Luluo froze at Chen Chongqing's words, and then she felt extremely sweet. Yes, how could Sir leave me alone? At the most dangerous moment, he would assuredly break through the clouds and bring me away in golden light. But if I had told the Li Palace of this matter from the start, the human race might have other ways to deal with it. Sir, would you have personally come? Luoluo thought to herself, I have to hide my intentions from Sir, even if I have to hide it for the rest of my life. It would be wonderful if I could have a lifetime. Senior Biyanghong is about to leave. Chen Chongqing's gloomy voice shattered her slightly sweet and sour thoughts. The meaning of leave was not to leave White Emperor City, but to leave the world. Luoluo was shocked, and then she became sad. This sadness was because of that senior she had never met, and also because of something else. An expert of the divine domain had been murdered and died in White Emperor City. In the end, an explanation had to be given for this matter. Was it truly time for the human race and the demi-human race to part? She had just reunited with Sir, but would it be difficult to meet him again? She grabbed Chen Chongqing's belt, her small face brimming with hidden bitterness. Sir, I am not willing. Chen Chongqing had failed to dodge, as her movements were as fast as lightning. Besides the increase in her cultivation, it was also because she had done this action countless times. Back in the Orthodox Academy, every time Chen Chongqing drove her back to the 100 Herb Garden, or when she returned to the Li Palace or the Imperial Palace, she would use this method to stall for time. She also had an even more practiced action that could stall for even longer. She would lean over and hug Chen Chongqing's thigh. But she was still a little older, so she was somewhat embarrassed to do this. Chen Chongqing replied, It's not as serious as you think. It's just that since you've done something, you have to pay the price. If the human race did not pursue the death of an expert of the divine domain, White Emperor City would inevitably have to pay an extremely heavy price. His words were not explicit, but the target his sword was pointing at was extremely clear. Luoluo whispered, Mother, she is pregnant. This was telling Chen Chongqing that Madame Mu's status would become even more stable, but correspondingly, her status and weight in the demi-human race would be greatly weakened. But it's fine. I will work hard. Luoluo cutely stuck out her tongue. What used to be a cheerful smile now looked so forced, even a little heavy. Chen Chongqing felt a great deal of pity as he gazed at her small face. You don't need to do anything. Luoluo looked at him and very seriously said, Teacher, in truth, I have many supporters. I just thought that Sir would come to save me anyway, so I didn't do anything. Chen Chongqing replied, Even if you can do many things, don't do them. Luoluo opened her eyes wide and asked, Why is that? Chen Chongqing rubbed her head and said, Because she's your mother, and also because I happen to know that you like to stand at very high places. Luoluo truly did like to stand at high places, like the great banyan tree by the lake in the Orthodox Academy, the Hall of Pure Virtue in the Li Palace, or this Palace Hall. Those who did not understand her would think that this most revered princess in the world liked to look down on others from high places. But Chen Chongqing knew that this was not the case. Luoluo liked to stand at very high places because only there could she see very far away places. How can a girl who likes to see far away stay here to be empress? Chen Chongqing earnestly said to her. Luoluo stared at him in a daze, then suddenly threw herself into his embrace and tightly hugged him. Her small face rubbed against his chest as she made happy noises. The noises were very soft, sometimes mewing, sometimes snoring. It sounded like a kitten that had just eaten its fill and had its fur stroked 800 times. An old comrade has released another new book. Chronicles of Rivers and Mountains and Beauties, Navigating the Tides, The Official Road Without Bounds, author Rui Zhen's new book, Beacon Emperor. It's a historical fantasy genre. Rising from the wilderness, making a name for oneself on the battlefield, and sweeping through the imperial court. This book will give you a different kind of fantasy experience. http /book/10037793332. SPX. To be continued. Chapter 176. Luluo was very moved by Chen Chongqing's words. But in Chen Chongqing's view, this was a matter of course. Whether it was the demi-human empress or someone else, if you wanted to do it, then do it. If you didn't want to do it, then don't do it. It could not be influenced by any other factor, not even the future of the continent. When Tang 36 had said that he did not want to be head of the Tang clan, he had also taken this stance. Luluo knew what he was thinking, but this matter of course made her even more moved. After some time, she reluctantly left his embrace. She looked at him and softly said, "I don't believe father will support mother's opinion." Chen Chongqing was quiet for a while, then said, "I also hope so, but I'm not too sure." Abandoning the alliance with the human race and allying with the demons was a turning point in history for the demi-human race and the entire continent. For the demi-human race's future, any choice the White Emperor made could be imagined. Based on Chen Chongqing's reasoning, there were some problems that were not easy to explain. For instance, when the Tianhai Divine Empress had shaken the entire continent, why had the White Emperor not been wary of the human race? It was because they had not been standing high enough and could not see far enough. At the time, the internal problems of the human race had not been resolved. Shang Xingzhou had been quietly watching the capital from the riverbank, and the Pope had been watching the imperial palace from the Li Palace with complex emotions. In those years, the White Emperor had secretly supported Shang Xingzhou, probably out of consideration for balancing the factions within the human race. Later on, the Tianhai Divine Empress died and many experts of the human race died. This also meant that the human race no longer had any major internal conflict. A unified will had always been the most frightening thing, and the demon race was now much weaker because of its internal strife. From every angle, the demi-human race seemed to have a natural need to ally with the demon race. Thus, Chen Chongqing could not make any firm judgments about the White Emperor's stance. It now seemed that the greatest hope for him and the human race lay in the opposition within the demi-human race. The mood in White Emperor City was extremely oppressive. Patrolling soldiers and somber beast guards could be seen everywhere. Quite a few of the usually bustling shops on the western side of the street were closed, and the populace rarely ventured out. It was abnormally quiet. Compared to the mood in the city, the vast plains on the two shores of the Red River were even more tense. Just like the wildfire beneath the celestial trees, it seemed like it could explode at any moment. The Blackstone army stationed at Wild Mountain Pass had a riot last night. Great Goblin General he had only managed to stabilize the situation with great difficulty, and no major changes had occurred. Even the most disciplined and elite of the demi-human race, the Beast Cavalry, was somewhat shaken, not to mention the miscellaneous troops stationed in the mountains, as well as the large and small tribes. According to reports from various places, in the short span of 2 days, there had already been many bloody conflicts among the demon race army, and the various tribes had already begun to assemble their troops. This was the signal of war, the omen of a storm. What was about to happen was not a war with the demon race or the human race, but a war between the two major forces of the demon race. The entire demon race had already been clearly divided into two factions. Madame Mu represented the will of the imperial clan, and the council of elders represented by the Xiang clan leader supported the alliance with the demons. Standing on the opposite side was Luoluo's side. They had the prime minister as their representative civil official system and the support of many tribes. They hoped to maintain their friendship with the human race. The former's strength was greater than the latter's, but the problem was that the latter's attitude was very unyielding and had the strong support of the human race represented by Chen Chongqing. If Madame Mu wanted to forcefully announce the letter to the world, the demi-human race might really be plunged into civil war. No one was willing to see this sight, so before the conflict finally escalated, Both the Xiong clan leader and the other demi-human personages first hoped to persuade the other side through negotiations. Thus, in the last 2 days, there were very few pedestrians on the streets of White Emperor City, while the residences of the elders and ministers were packed with guests. Even the imperial court had stopped. The two most lively places were the Xiong clan's estate and the Taoist church of the Western Waste. The former was because the demon lord was probably still in that large courtyard extremely close to the Xiong clan's estate, currently under the Xiong clan's protection. The latter was because Chen Chongxing was living there. The Pope of the human race and the demon lord were in the same city, separated by Tensum Li. This was a sight that had never before appeared in history. The atmosphere of the city naturally became unprecedentedly strange. Many tribal leaders, merchants, and officials entered the Xiong clan's estate, only to come out after some time. From their expressions, it was impossible to tell what had happened in the estate, what their discussions with the demon lord had been like, or even whether they had seen the demon lord. In short, everything seemed very mysterious. Chen Chongxing used an entire day to receive the representatives of the various factions. The Bear tribe leader and the Sher clan leader introduced the leaders of many small tribes to pay their respects. The Taoist church of the Western Wastes was instantly overcrowded. When those two young Meng clan representatives entered the Taoist church and used the firmest of tones to express their support for the human race, Chen Chongxing was very shocked. It was not because they were too enthusiastic that made him suspicious, but because he recognized them. Many years ago, when he went from Xining village to the capital, wanting to enter the Six Ivies, he had encountered a pair of hunter brothers from the Elder's Ridge. In the end, those hunter brothers successfully entered Star Caesar Academy and became glorious officers of the Great Zhou. He had never imagined that these hunter brothers were actually demi-humans. Now that he thought about it, this was naturally a collaboration between the Great Zhou army and the Meng clan. Back then, the principal of Star Caesar Academy, Chen Guansong, had been a truly extraordinary individual. It was no wonder that Shang Xingzhou believed him to be the best candidate for the next leader of the Great Zhou army. Alas, in the end, he had died in the Tianhai Divine Empress's final phoenix fire. His grand plans and schemes had all come to nothing, but fortunately, he had left behind some shade for his descendants. Deep in the night, the representatives and officials of the various races that had come to pay their respects to Chen Chongxing withdrew from the Taoist Church of the Western Wastes, leaving only the most important personages behind. They were now the staunchest representatives of the human race's allies. The events of the day had filled them with even more confidence, but there were still some matters that made them very uneasy. If His Majesty leaves seclusion, he can decide everything with a single word. Even if he is injured and needs to quietly cultivate, how can he not appear in the face of such a major event? The Prime Minister fell quiet for a very long time in response to the Bear tribe leader's questions, and then he said this. In the last few years, no one has personally seen His Majesty, not even I. A few days ago, the chief elder went to sense His Majesty's spiritual sense. The Sher clan leader expressionlessly said, Old Xiong is the most patient and most forbearing person I have ever seen in my life. No matter how I think about it, I cannot understand why he would jump out this time. Moreover, all the tribes along the two shores of the Red River know that his relationship with the Empress is not very good. Just because of a strand of His Majesty's spiritual sense, he changed? If he really is one of the Empress's people, who can be sure that he wasn't lying that night? After listening to this extremely quiet discussion, Chen Chongxing fell quiet for a very long time. He knew that these demi-human personages were using this method to remind him, to warn him. But this matter was far too inconceivable, so even though there was no one around, they only dared to use these vague and ambiguous words to mention it. No matter what it is, you have to see it with your own eyes in order to judge whether it's true or false. I do not want the demi-human race to start a civil war, but the present situation must be broken as quickly as possible. After a pause, Chen Chongqing said, "I will go see His Majesty the White Emperor." Chapter 177. There were no clouds in the night sky, only stars scattered everywhere like sesame seeds. There seemed to be no pattern to them, and they were smooth and uniform in every direction. Chen Chongqing stood by the window and looked at the starry sky that was indeed closer than the ground. He repeated the previous conversation. Luoluo stood at his side, her left hand grabbing his sleeve out of habit. She tilted her head and thought for a moment before saying, "Then let's go see him." Chen Chongqing glanced at her and said, "This matter needs to be done in secret. Your mother can't find out." The Shi clan leader had already drawn the rough location of Emperor Bai's seclusion on the map and handed it over to him. If he wanted to go there, he had to go through a secret passage in the palace. In his view, although Luoluo was a noble princess, under Madame Mu's deliberate suppression, she should not have much control over the imperial city. Luoluo blinked her eyes and said seriously, "Sir, don't worry. I'm your student. I'm capable of doing these things." Chen Chongqing felt that these words had the flavor of Su Li or Tang 36, and he couldn't help but laugh. Walking out from the damp and dark but not cold stone path, on the contrary, it was stuffy and hot. A snowy mountain along with the morning light entered Chen Chongqing's eyes. The snowy mountain was thousands of feet high. Below it were black cliffs and primeval forests. The top half of the mountain was completely covered in white snow. Under the morning light, it glowed with a dazzling light. It rose abruptly from the lakeside and extended towards the north. It was impossible to see the end of it. It even made people wonder whether it would continue to the end of the world. It seemed extremely majestic, like a miracle. Chen Chongqing knew that this snowy mountain that stretched for countless miles was the Starfall Mountains that were often mentioned in ancient records. The Starfall Mountains grew along the western coast and suddenly protruded out of the earth to the north of White Emperor City. To the left, 100-some li was the ocean, its peaks covered in snow that had accumulated for tens of thousands of years. The mountain range also stretched for tens of thousands of li, all the way to the extreme north. In the middle was a relatively flat plain known as Zhanling. After traveling southeast for 10-some days and nights, they arrived at the westernmost Song Province Army headquarters. Between Zhanling and the Song Province Army headquarters was a grassland that was the homeland of the elves. Now, it belonged to Chen Chongqing and Su Yorong. Chen Chongqing walked to the lakeside and looked at the opposite mountain range. He recalled the records in the Taoist canon that the Red River had originated from one of these snowy peaks, and then he recalled the connection between him and that plain, and he felt a strange sensation. Ever since the demi-human race established their kingdom on the Red River, countless generations of white emperors and empresses had been buried in the Starfall Mountains. According to the rules of the ancestral spirits, in order to prevent evildoers from peeking at the remains of the great Yao and the remnants of its true blood, the successive white emperors had never built a tomb in the mountains. They would only wait until the end of their lifespans before they would follow the secret path that Chen Chongqing had taken and arrive in the mountains. They would randomly choose a place to close their eyes and return their souls to the sea of stars. Of course, other than when they were on the verge of death, the successive white emperors would often come to the Starfall Mountains to pay their respects to their ancestors, to enjoy the scenery, or to search for opportunities to break into the next realm. Naturally, it was unavoidable that they would build buildings for resting in these snowy peaks. It was just that these buildings were surrounded by extremely powerful seals, making it extremely difficult for anyone other than the White Emperor to enter. The current White Emperor and the Demon Lord engaged in a heaven-shaking battle on the snowy plains to the north of Mount Han. The Demon Lord was heavily injured, and then Black Robe and the Demon Commander worked together to overthrow him. The White Emperor's injuries were also extremely severe. In the last few years, he had secluded himself in the Starfall Mountains. Other than Madame Mu and the Xiong clan leader, very few people knew where he was. Chen Chongqing had the map provided by the Shi clan leader, so he naturally did not lose his way. Using the Yesher step to tread on the snow, he quickly found the place. In front of two extremely verdant and ancient pines was a large black cliff. The cliff was covered in ice and snow that had not melted for tens of thousands of years. It looked extremely cold and lifeless, with nothing out of the ordinary about it. The area indicated on the map was very vast. Chen Chongqing did not know where the entrance was, so he could only spread his spiritual sense in all directions. However, he discovered that a barrier had appeared in front of him. This barrier was like a cushion of air, cutting off his spiritual sense, but it actually calmed his mind, because he had confirmed that this was the place. Hidden beneath the black cliff and the frigid ice and snow was an array. After sensing it for a few moments, he discovered the formidable aspects of this array. This array probably originated from the same source as the Tong Palace array in the capital's Imperial Palace. It was both strict and dangerous, and contained its own mysteries between life and death. However, perhaps because it had absorbed too much qi from the snowy peaks and cold lakes, this array was even colder and more callous than the Tong Palace. It faintly exuded a somber aura, but also an extremely powerful qi of the Imperial clan. If this array was activated, it would probably be no less powerful than the seal of the Red River. Of course, compared to the imperial design of the capital, it was still much weaker. 2 days ago, when Chen Chongqing broke the seal of the Red River, he had consumed too much of the light energy in the divine staff of the orthodoxy and could not use it again. So what method could he use to break the array? Since there were arrays in the world, there was naturally a corresponding method to break them. Chen Chongqing was well versed in the Taoist canon, and after cultivating, he had also studied arrays, but he was still not skilled in this Tao. After studying it for a very long time, he could only think of one possibility. As he gazed at the black cliff of ice, he once more felt that strange feeling in his heart. If he had not mistaken her for an elf girl, would they have been together even earlier? If on that day on the banks of the Tong River, he had patiently waited for half a day after reading the letter, would she have come with him on a crane? If she were here, would she be able to see the flaw in this array with just a glance? With a clang, several dozen swords appeared in the sky. An incomparably awe-inspiring sword intent spread out in all directions from Chen Chongqing's body, instantly chopping apart the countless snowflakes drifting down. Chen Chongqing gripped the stainless sword and warily gazed at a protrusion at the very bottom of the black cliff. The snowflakes drifting down came from the ice and snow above the black cliff. This was because the cliff had been shaken, as clearly as his feet could feel. The protrusion at the bottom of the black cliff suddenly split open and 2 people climbed out. The several dozen swords trembled and let out a frightening hum, but they did not attack, because Chen Chongqing recognized the identities of these 2 people. These 2 people were Jin Yulu and Xiaoda. Jin Yulu had once been the gatekeeper of the Orthodox Academy and had helped Chen Chongqing resolve many problems. Although they had not met for many years, their friendship still existed. Although Xiaoda and Chen Chongqing were enemies, he had always had a close relationship with the human race. In the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, he and Xiao Zhang had forced their way into the imperial palace and helped the Tang's second master seize control of the imperial design. One could imagine that he had been Shang Xingzhou's collaborator at the time. The resolute attitude the Shi clan leader had displayed in the heavenly selection ceremony and in the following 2 days also proved this point. Chen Chongqing naturally would not attack them, but he had not expected them to emerge from the black cliff. If the White Emperor really was in secluded cultivation in the depths of the cliff, had they seen him? At this moment, not even he knew which answer he wanted to hear, because none of them seemed good. To be continued. Chapter 178. Jin Yulu was still wearing that embroidered robe covered in copper coins, looking like a wealthy man. However, he was now in a rather sorry state, his body covered in mud and stone fragments. Xiaoda's appearance was even worse. His clothes were covered in yellow mud, a color even deeper than the ruthless yellow in his eyes, more like some sort of filth. Seeing Chen Chongqing standing outside the cliff, Jin Yulu was very shocked, but soon after, a gratified expression appeared on his face. He did not need to think to know that Chen Chongqing had appeared because of Luoluo. Xiaoda looked at Chen Chongqing with a somewhat complicated gaze. In the last few years, he had often unconsciously acted in accordance with Chen Chongqing's style. In other words, he was learning from the opponent he had once hated the most. Now that he had suddenly met him, someone as proud as him could not help but feel somewhat awkward. Jin Yulu asked, "Your Holiness the Pope has also come to see His Majesty?" Chen Chongqing nodded and asked, "Did you see him?" Jin Yulu shook his head, seeming particularly tired. "I knew it was inside, but I couldn't get in no matter what." Chen Chongqing was quiet for a while, then asked, "Is the sage well?" Jin Yulu replied, "I haven't seen him, so I don't know." A wary expression appeared on Xiaoda's face. Chen Chongqing said to him, "The Shi clan leader told me of this position." Xiaoda understood the hidden meaning in these words and said, "Then it's up to you now." The Shi clan leader had always been renowned for his intelligence and caution. If he were not certain that Xiaoda could not succeed, he would never have told Chen Chongqing the location of the White Emperor's seclusion. Chen Chongqing gazed at the black cliff, sensing the power of the sealing array, and slightly arched his brows. If he wanted to resolve all the problems at hand, he first had to determine the situation within the black cliff. This was what Chen Chongqing thought. This was what the Shi clan leader thought. Xiaoda also thought, so he withdrew from the heavenly selection ceremony that he had planned for so many years, came to the black cliff, and began to dig a hole. Jin Yulu also thought this way. He had come earlier than Xiaoda and dug even faster. By now, Xiaoda had been digging for 2 days and 2 nights without rest, while Jin Yulu had been digging for 4 days and 4 nights. Chen Chongqing had been prepared to use the method of forcefully breaking through the cliff to get past the seal. This method of relying purely on strength seemed crude, even idiotic, but it was often the correct choice. Experts like Xiaoda and Jin Yulu naturally understood this principle. Unfortunately, they still failed. There was no need for Chen Chongqing to try again, but he wanted to go in and take a look. The entrance to the cave was on the surface of the black cliff, but it wasn't straight. Instead, it slanted upwards until it reached the deepest part of the cliff. Chen Chongqing followed Jin Yulu and Xiaoda for a very long time before reaching the end. Looking at the clear and deep claw marks on the cave walls, feeling the remaining violent aura, he seemed to see what had really happened in the past few days. Jin Yulu and Xiaoda had entered a berserk state, their mountainous bodies madly attacking the hard cliff. Occasionally, the silhouettes of massive lions and leopards would appear in the dark cave. Soon, he noticed something strange about the cave walls. The stone wall in front of him was very smooth, like a piece of jade. There were no cracks, not even dirt. Jin Yulu said, "We've tried changing directions several times, but we couldn't get around this stone wall. This means that this place is the living pivot of the formation." Chen Chongqing asked, "What is this stone wall itself?" Jin Yulu replied, "It should be the legendary star stone. It has a weight countless times greater than its volume. Even an expert of the divine domain would find it very difficult to move." Hearing the name Star Stone, Chen Chongqing recalled the treasure of the orthodoxy that Taoist Baisher had once held. After a moment of silence, he stepped forward and fiercely slashed at the stone wall with the stainless sword. There was a clang. The stainless sword was as bright and sharp as ever, undamaged, but it had only left behind a very faint mark on the stone wall. If he wanted to use the stainless sword to cut through this stone wall, he would have to spend many days. Chen Chongqing was somewhat disappointed, but he didn't know that Jin Yulu and Xiaoda were both shocked by this sight. Besides its unimaginable density and weight, Star Stone was also famous for its toughness. Jin Yulu and Xiaoda had tried many times, But whether it was the claws of their true form in the berserk state or the high-level magical artifacts they carried with them, none of them could leave a single mark on the surface of Star Stone. A casual swing of Chen Chongqing's sword had managed to cut a small hole in the stone wall. Just how sharp was this sword? Xiaoda had clashed with Chen Chongqing's sword in the alley of the Northern Military Department. At the time, he had not felt that Chen Chongqing's sword was this frightening, but he soon realized that this was probably because Chen Chongqing's cultivation in the path of the sword had greatly increased in the last few years. Chen Chongqing asked, "Since it's a ceiling array, someone should have laid it down. Who could place such a heavy stone wall in the position of the living pivot of heavenly secrets?" Jin Yulu replied, "It was probably the Empress who used the power of the tides to push the star stone to seal this place." Xiaoda suddenly said, "Star stones can absorb star radiance." Chen Chongqing was somewhat confused as to why he had suddenly said this, but he soon understood, and his expression turned rather grave. Star radiance was not starlight, but an invisible energy extracted from the swaying of the invisible line between the distant star and the cultivator. The true essence in the body of a cultivator was also star radiance, and not even a saint could escape this category. If this stone wall could endlessly absorb star radiance, it also meant that it could absorb the White Emperor's true essence. Even if the White Emperor had an unfathomable cultivation and did not care about the interference of the star stone, he was still quietly recuperating in the depths of the Black Cliff. Why would he add more trouble to Chen Chongqing's troubles? All these clues ultimately pointed to one possibility. Whether it's the heavenly selection ceremony or the alliance with the demons, it turns out that it has nothing to do with us demi-humans, but the ambitions of the great Western continent. If His Majesty has already returned to the Sea of Stars. In a very short time, Jin Yulu had aged a great deal, his voice beginning to tremble. This was not a very likely possibility. When an expert of the divine domain returned to the Sea of Stars, the entire continent would sense it. This was a heavenly omen. When the blue-clothed visitor had just died, Madame Mu, who was 80,000 li away, had learned of the news. When plotting against Bianghong and Wuqiongbai, Madame Mu had first activated the seal of the Red River for this very reason. And the White Emperor was a saint of this generation. If he really did return to the Sea of Stars, no matter how powerful the seal was, it would not be able to block the news, and the world would assuredly quake. Xiaoda solemnly said, "Even if His Majesty is fine, the situation is still very dangerous. In the battle with the Demon Lord, His Majesty suffered extremely heavy injuries, and now that the Empress has used this method, not only has His Majesty's injuries not improved, they are only worsening by the day. If a few more days pass, the worst might really occur." When they thought of this possibility, Jin Yulu and Xiaoda both grimaced, but Chen Chongqing was much calmer. Just as he had thought before entering the Black Cliff, the White Emperor's death or survival was extremely bad news for the human race. If it was the former, it meant that there was no one in the demi-human race that could suppress Madame Mu's ambitions. If it was the latter, it meant that the White Emperor truly did share Madame Mu's thoughts, that he wanted to ally with the demons. With a saint like this watching from the shadows, what else could he do? Now, he speculated that the White Emperor was heavily injured, imprisoned and weakened by Madame Mu's method. This situation was actually the best. This meant that the Xiong clan leader had been pretending to have the White Emperor's decree that night. In reality, the White Emperor still supported the human race. In that case, as long as he was rescued, everything would be easily solved. At this moment, an extremely bright and clear cry of a crane came from outside the cave. Chen Chongqing emerged from the cave, took down the paper, and read it, his expression turning extremely solemn. The white crane had brought two pieces of news. One was good news, one was bad news. Xian Yuanpa had awakened while Bianghong had fallen unconscious. To be continued. Chapter 179. After receiving the letter, Chen Chongqing said a few words to Jin Yulu and Xiaoda before riding off on the crane. Jin Yulu and Xiaoda glanced at each other, seeing the doubt and unease in each other's eyes. Before Chen Chongqing left, he said that he was going to take care of something and that he would return once he was done. In the end, he said that he hoped that the matter would not be finished. These words were very strange and incomprehensible. Just what sort of matter was it that was more important than helping the White Emperor escape? On a snowy peak 10 li away from the Black Cliff, the drifting snow and white clothes seemed to fuse together. Su Yorong had already been standing here for some time. She had watched Chen Chongqing, Jin Yulu, and Xiaoda enter the Black Cliff, watch the white crane arrive, and then Chen Chongqing leave. She had vaguely guessed at what had happened in White Emperor City, and her mood had also been somewhat affected. She had already observed the ceiling array of the Black Cliff for a long enough time to find a way to break it. She took out a white paper from her sleeve and folded it into a crane, then let it go. The paper crane flew with the wind, drifting to the Black Cliff and then landing on the ground. Xiaoda warily looked around, but found nothing. He picked up the paper crane and opened it. He saw 2 words written on the paper, the handwriting graceful and probably written by a woman. The 2 words were, Sword Array. With Su Yorong's speed, it took only a very short amount of time to return from the Starfall Mountains to White Emperor City. She did not go to the small courtyard behind the temple to the Celestial Tree because she still did not want to meet with Chen Chongqing, and also because she subconsciously did not want to see those scenes. When she returned to the inn from yesterday, she did not return to her room. Instead, she went to the front hall and ordered the inn's most famous jetong buns. The atmosphere in White Emperor City was tense and strange. There were not many pedestrians on the streets, so the inn's business was naturally poor. Very few people had the leisure to come here for breakfast. The diners who still wanted to eat at a time like this were assuredly the truly lively idlers, and lively idlers were naturally good at gossiping. As Su Yorong ate her beef and egg porridge and her buns, she listened in on the gossip of the guests at the neighboring tables. Recently, the greatest excitement in White Emperor City had naturally been the heavenly selection ceremony and the successive appearances of the Demon Lord and Chen Chongqing. As for the most heated gossip, it was naturally the words that Xian Yuanpe had shouted in front of the imperial city. It was also the words that Princess Luoluo had personally admitted. She did not know what the Pope was thinking, but seeing that he did not care about the long journey, rode a crane and said those words, "He should like Her Highness, right? I heard that the human race is very afraid of this kind of thing, but when did our demon race care about this? If you like it, then let's sleep together. I've heard that His Holiness the Pope and the Holy Maiden are engaged, but when has our demi-human race ever cared about such things? They could just snatch it. If they really couldn't snatch it, they could sleep together." Su Yorong's mood was originally a little down. She had heard a stomach full of gossip during the meal, so she wasn't full at all, which made her mood even worse. The so-called brightly lit Tao heart that was calm like water had long since been forgotten by her. She took a steamed bun and a plate of vinegar garlic and returned to her room. She simply washed up and sat in front of the table. Looking at herself in the bronze mirror, she began to be lost in thought. The reflection in the mirror was not very clear, rather blurry, but the face in the mirror was still beautiful, like the most beautiful flower the world could imagine. I'm her teacher. If I say she can't marry, she can't marry. It was truly a domineering statement. What a good relationship between teacher and student. She thought mockingly. She was keenly aware that to Chen Chongqing, the little black dragon represented a favor that he would definitely repay for the rest of his life. The truly troublesome one was still Luoluo. No matter how one looked at it, Luoluo was the type of girl that men most liked, not to mention that her love for Chen Chongqing was so clean and undemanding. She could not do this, could not love Chen Chongqing more than herself. She couldn't even understand how someone could do it. She only knew that if she wanted to walk the long 1,000 years of cultivation with Chen Chongqing, she would have to face the greatest challenge. The more she thought about it, the more unhappy she became. She pouted, revealing the attitude of a little girl that she had never seen in the outside world. She looked at herself in the mirror and snorted, "You're so beautiful, you're the most beautiful girl in the world. It's not like he's blind." After saying this, she suddenly came to her senses. Feeling very ashamed, she let out a groan and covered her face. At this moment, a thin layer of mist suddenly appeared in the mirror. Su Yorong's expression froze, but she quickly regained her composure. There was no longer any anger or embarrassment in her eyes, only calm and beautiful. At this moment, she was the holy maiden, her temperament like a spring forest after a fresh rain. The mist in the mirror gradually changed, condensing into thick and thin lines. One could faintly make out the shape of a face. The image was still blurry, making it impossible to see the features, but for some reason, that face seemed incredibly handsome and exuded a temperament like that of a high mountain. Su Yorong looked at the man in the mirror and said, "I personally went to see the seal. Since the White Emperor is still alive, he should be able to come out. At the very least, he should be able to send a message." Hearing these words, the man in the mirror was silent for a long time. It was clear that these seemingly ordinary words had some impact on his mind. Su Yorong asked no questions, only quietly waited. The man sighed, indescribably sorrowful, even somewhat sorrowful. He said, "Since it's like this, let's help him come out." Su Yorong said, "I've already sent a message to Chen Chongqing. With his comprehension, he should be able to very quickly break the seal." The man said, "Since it's like this, all of you must be more cautious." Su Yorong suddenly asked, "Why is he willing to help you when you have no other methods? In the current situation, you have many opportunities to kill him." The man instead asked, "Then why are you willing to help me?" Su Yorong replied, "The greater picture is more important." The man calmly said, "It's the same principle. So he's not helping me, and I don't care about him. Killing him, there will be many more opportunities in the future." Su Yorong finally asked, "On Sir B's side, is there really no other method?" The man thought it over, then replied, "If not even that evil disciple can cure him, then there's nothing." The greater picture was naturally how the human race could continue to exist on this continent and multiply without end. Su Yorong had to consider this problem, the person in the copper mirror had to consider this problem, and Chen Chongqing, as the current pope of the human race, naturally had to consider this problem, even though he believed that he did not have the ability. There were many things that he did not have the ability to resolve. Even the medical path that he was most skilled in seemed to be completely useless at certain times. The white crane flew through the great trees of the Celestial Tree Temple and landed in the ruined courtyard. Xian Yuanpo's face was pale and his right arm hung limply by his side. When he saw Chen Chongqing, he barely managed to squeeze out a smile. Chen Chongqing went up and hugged him. After patting him 3 times on the back, he said nothing more and walked into the room. Yang Hong leaned against the wall, his eyes closed, his expression normal as if he was sleeping. Chen Chongqing silently walked up to him, took the needles from his finger, and began to treat him once more. It was said that his cinnabar pill could regrow bones and revive the dead, but that was actually just an exaggerated rumor. The cinnabar pill contained the blood of the sacred blood, could only treat external wounds like blood loss, broken bones, or ruptured abdomens. Yang Hong's injuries were caused by the 2 angels from the sacred light continent. His soul and body had suffered irreversible injuries that were simply impossible to treat. After some time, Chen Chongqing's Taoist robe was completely drenched in sweat. Fortunately, after the Tianhai Divine Empress had reconstructed his meridians, the strange fragrance that could drive the entire world mad was no longer present. Yang Hong slowly opened his eyes, finally waking up. Chen Chongqing once more saw that gloomy, gray-tinged qi in the depths of his eyes. This qi was extremely faint, like the fresh snow falling from a snowy plain, the raindrops falling from a mountain stream. If one did not possess an extremely powerful spiritual sense like his, they would have found it utterly impossible to notice. This qi was the will of death. To be continued. Chapter 180. 2 days had passed, and Madame Mu had probably already discovered from certain details that Byong-hong and Wuqiong-bai were still alive and in this small courtyard. But presumably, she would not act against Byong-hong and Wuqiong-bai, because Chen Chongqing was already here and the rift within the demi-human race was already extremely deep. Only if she truly began to go crazy and no longer cared that the demi-human race would be burned to ashes in the flames of civil war. The wind from the river rustled the leaves in the temple of the celestial tree, which then fell into the quiet courtyard. The rustling was very clear. Such a quiet moment was extremely suitable for chatting or handing over a few things. Especially at this moment, when Byong-hong had used some method to make Wuqiong-bai fall asleep. Chen Chongqing asked, "What does Senior wish to leave behind? Or what do you want us to do?" Byong-hong replied, "In the past, I believed that I would leave behind a descendant, but since there is none now, there is no need to say anything." When he said this, his expression was very calm, and his tone was also very indifferent, but anyone could hear the deep pain hidden in it. An expert of the continent, on his deathbed with no one to send him off, to see his son die early, anyone would find it very difficult to accept. Chen Chongqing said, "It is also good to leave behind some of Senior's thoughts for the common people." Many people knew that Byong-hong was a scholar from Shiling's 10,000 Years Pavilion, but his life experiences and cultivation had always been a mystery. Just what aspect of my past does the common people want to know the most? Byong-hong glanced at Wuqiong-bai and sighed. "It's probably why you married her." Chen Chongqing thought this over, then very honestly said, "There truly are many people who don't understand. Although no one has ever dared to mention this matter to us husband and wife, I know that this sort of gossip has always existed in many taverns and inns. There have even been some storytellers who helped us think of many bizarre stories, imagined many scenarios for me. The bee in those stories truly suffered an extremely tragic fate, and even I felt very sympathetic when I heard it." Byong-hong smiled and continued, "It's all fake. There are so many things in life that have no choice, much less someone like me." Chen Chongqing thought to himself that this was indeed the case. An expert of the divine domain possessed unimaginable power and authority, not much different from an emperor. How could they possibly endure for so many years because they had no other choice? Byong-hong explained, "This story is really much simpler than all of you think. When I was young, my family was poor. My master took me in and raised me. I grew up together with my junior sister. She respected and loved me, never doing anything that made me unhappy. I naturally also loved and pitied her. When I was a little older, I naturally married her." Chen Chongqing didn't expect the story to be so simple. Byong-hong added, "Although she truly was not like this when I married her, if I think about it carefully, isn't this also my fault?" Chen Chongqing said, "If this is true, then Senior's arrogance towards her is indeed equivalent to indulging her in evil." Byong-hong replied, "So I'm not a gentleman, nor am I a good person." Chen Chongqing still couldn't accept it and said, "I still don't think this is right." Byong-hong looked at him and said, "If your wife treated you extremely well, but had an extremely bad personality, and was even a great evil and wicked person, what would you do?" This question seemed very easy to answer, but it was extremely complicated upon further thought. Chen Chongqing had never thought about such matters before, so he naturally didn't know the answer. Wuqiong-bai happened to wake up at this moment. When she heard these words, she naturally believed that Byong-hong was talking about her. She instantly became angry and cursed. "I just killed a few pieces of trash that disrespected their elders, but do you think I'm a great evil and wicked person? You heartless thing!" The silence in the courtyard was instantly shattered, everything seeming to be thrown into disarray. Byung-hong did not explain. He looked at her and said with extreme seriousness and gentleness, "In the future, don't do this sort of thing, all right?" Just like the day before yesterday, Wu Qiong-bai once more panicked. She mumbled, "Didn't I already promise you? Why keep bringing this up?" Byung-hong smiled at her and said, "Junior sister, I'm very sorry that I can no longer accompany you." Wu Qiong-bai became even more panicked. She grabbed his clothes and shrieked, "What nonsense are you saying?" Byung-hong sighed and said, "I'm not speaking nonsense." Wu Qiong-bai's face paled. Her nervousness made her tongue-tied, her words somewhat stuttering. "But you still can't speak nonsense," Byung-hong replied. "I'm not speaking nonsense." Wu Qiong-bai yelled in absolute terror, "I forbid you from leaving, or else I'll cut off Guan Bai's hand as well. Or else, I'll throw myself in with the demons. I once thought of asking His Holiness to take me away, and only leave you with the letter of divorce. But I know that you've definitely guessed that I'm dead, so it's better to just say it." Byung-hong tenderly caressed her face and said, "Because you know that I won't abandon you." Xian Yuanpa stood by the door, constantly wiping his tears with his sleeve, but he couldn't wipe them clean. He didn't really understand these things, but he felt that his senior's words were rather heart-wrenching. "Can I trouble you to buy a few steamed buns?" Byung-hong somewhat embarrassedly said to him. "I want to eat the beef and onion filling." Startled, Xian Yuanpa hurriedly ran out of the small courtyard, completely disregarding the fact that he had only just recovered from his heavy injuries and was still incredibly weak. In the morning mist and steam, he ran back to the Huji bun store, brimming with regret. He thought, "Why didn't I see that senior wanted to eat beef buns a few days ago?" Xian Yuanpa carried a tray of steamed buns back to the small courtyard, escorted by 10 some priests and experts of the bear tribe. The tray of steamed buns was still scalding hot. If one tore off the soft skin, one could smell the aroma of beef, onion, and chili oil. Alas, it was a little too late. Byung-hong's eyes were closed, no longer breathing. Xian Yuanpa froze. The steam from the steamer in his bosom drifted up into the gloomy sky, also falling on his face. It was somewhat hot, somewhat wet. Chen Chongqing silently lowered his head, his fingers trembling at his side, the sword in his sheath vibrating with them. Xian Yuanpa kneeled in front of Byung-hong, placed the tray of steamed buns in front of him, and then respectfully kowtowed several times, tears streaming down his face. Wu Qiong-bai noticed nothing. She stared in a daze at Byung-hong, her eyes gradually growing lax and her body swaying. Dang 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 dang! A bell rang out from the celestial tree temple. Wu Qiong-bai came to her senses, her eyes reddening and her lips trembling. She finally understood what had happened. A mournful sob resounded from the small courtyard. Chen Chongqing walked out of the courtyard. As he listened to the bell from the celestial tree temple, he recalled the night before Archbishop Mei Lisha died. On that night, the capital had also heard the sound of a bell. Was the bell really the signal to return home? Was the Sea of Stars really the homeland of all souls? Whether noble or lowly, beautiful or ugly? Just like a sob? No matter how unpleasant it was to hear, was it still so sorrowful? It's been a long time since I've chatted. Today I thought about it again. I actually have many things I want to say to everyone, but I decided not to. Reading is fine. I wish everyone well. To be continued. Chapter 181. After Byung-hong's death, Wu Qiong-bai became somewhat foolish. Her hair was disheveled as she sat against the wall, hugging Byung-hong's body to her chest. She forbade anyone from approaching, much less moving. Chen Chongqing and Xian Yuanpa stood at the door, watching this sight, not knowing what to do. Byung-hong and Wu Qiong-bai were both experts of the divine domain. They could be considered the most famous couple on the continent. The entire continent knew that this couple had a very good relationship, but the entire continent did not understand why. More accurately, The entire continent did not understand why Byung-hong treated Wuqiong so well. The Tianhai Divine Empress had not understood, nor had Wang Pu. Because they could not understand, they and the rest of the world felt injustice for Byung-hong. Before his death, Byung-hong had told Chen Chongqing a very simple story, but Chen Chongqing still found it impossible to understand. He knew what sort of feeling it was to like someone. He deeply liked Su Yorong, but whether it was in the Garden of Zhou, in the snowstorm on the Bridge of Helplessness, or in the twilight of Holy Maiden Peak, he had already liked Su Yorong to the point where his heart could not let go of any other scenery, but he still found it impossible to understand this matter. If your wife treated you extremely well, but had an extremely bad personality, and was even a great villain, what would you do? He recalled Byung-hong's question. If Su Yorong was a great villain, what would he do? He did not know. He looked into the room. Wuqiong-bai's hair was scattered over her body, her black hair already graying. Her expression was one of utter defeat and despair. Chen Chongqing felt both pity and discomfort at this sight. In short, his emotions were rather complex. Xian Yuanpo was a very simple person, not one to think about complicated matters. When Wuqiong-bai wanted to destroy the Orthodox Academy, he had been the person closest to death. He naturally did not like this Taoist nun. He had only known Byung-hong for a very short time, but he deeply admired him and wanted to get close to him, to treat him as his master. But this would not change his attitude toward Wuqiong-bai. On the contrary, he loathed her even more, especially after seeing that quarrel. The more he liked Byung-hong, the more he loathed Wuqiong-bai. The more beautiful, the uglier. As expected, positions were relative. All things in the world and emotions were relative. Wuqiong-bai raised her head to look at Xian Yuanpo. Seeing the emotions in his eyes, she asked, "Do you hate me?" Xian Yuanpo was silent for a while before saying, "Yes, because I don't understand why you're still alive and he's dead. It's not fair." Wuqiong-bai indifferently said, "Good people don't live long while scourges live for 1,000 years. Don't you know this principle?" Xian Yuanpo didn't know how to respond to this and felt even more depressed. Chen Chongqing shook his head. A hint of ridicule flashed across Wuqiong-bai's face. "Don't you want to know why he treats me so well?" Xian Yuanpo's gaze moved from the steaming bun to Byung-hong's face. As he thought about how he could snatch Senior's body from this madman's hands, he completely ignored her. Chen Chongqing also said nothing. Wuqiong-bai sneered, "This is an extremely old story. If you don't ask me, I don't have the energy to recall it. Mr. B has already told us when you were asleep just now." Chen Chongqing paused, then continued, "If you want to add something, please go ahead. He was saved by my father from the 100-seed store. At the time, he was as thin as a monkey, too hungry, and his throat had been injured by an old beggar. I brought out my favorite soup dumplings, but he couldn't eat them. Even now, I can't forget that greedy and pained appearance. In the end, I tore up the entire tray of buns, gathered the gravy inside into a small bowl, and slowly fed it to him. Only then did I manage to save his life." Wuqiong-bai's expression became rather desolate as she said, "Later on, he told me that he had sworn to that bowl of meat juice that he would treat me well for the rest of his life. No matter what I did, he would not blame me, and no matter what danger he encountered, he would protect me." Chen Chongqing was quiet for a while, then said, "I think he did it. Correct, he truly did it. My treatment of him was not even 1% of what he gave me back. I knew that no one liked me, and I knew that he would even take the blame on himself. He would say that he had been stationed in Blue Pass Incognito for more than 70 years, and rarely returned home. He didn't get to see my father one last time, and when I had a miscarriage, he didn't come to take care of me. That's why my personality changed so much." Wuqiong-bai's voice was suddenly tinged with resentment. "But so what? He said that he would accompany me for the rest of my life, but now he's still leaving early." Xian Yuanpo did not understand. Senior is dead, but he didn't abandon you. Do I have to be blamed for this? Chen Chongqing understood and said, but before he left, he was still worried about you. So he said those words, telling me to change, telling me to listen to you. Wu Qiongbai sneered at him. Did you really think that I would be moved by these past events and suddenly repent? Xian Yuanpo was furious at these words while Chen Chongqing was also speechless. He could no longer understand what this Taoist nun wanted. Wu Qiongbai straightened Biyanghong, took a bun from the steamer, and began to eat. There was a lot of red oil in the beef and onion bun. Although it was no longer scalding hot, it had not congealed. 2 streams of red oil flowed down the corners of her lips, looking like blood. It was somewhat comical, somewhat disgusting, somewhat terrifying. Wu Qiongbai lowered her head. Neither Chen Chongqing nor Xian Yuanpa saw that her eyes were gradually suffused with ruthlessness. Chen Chongqing was still thinking about the things she had just said. Those things that Biyanghong owed her and his family were probably true, but why had Biyanghong not said them? He quickly understood the reason and meaning behind them, and couldn't help but feel somewhat perplexed. Wu Qiongbai believed that Biyanghong would say those things to show that he truly did owe her and his family, so that the world would be more lenient toward her. But she did not understand that if Biyanghong really did this, the world would only have an even worse impression of her. Whether it was the favor of saving her life at the very beginning or the events that followed, they would all make people feel that she was trying to force him to repay her. Biyanghong's method was even better. He did not talk about these things, only told an extremely simple story. He liked her. She was his wife, so he should protect her. This way, when he left this world, she could still receive some respect as his wife, and her days would presumably be a little better. Death was imminent, but in his final moments, Biyanghong was still thinking about how to make her days a little better, and he had done many things for her sake. This was naturally the feeling that left Chen Chongqing somewhat perplexed. He vaguely understood that the relationship between Biyanghong and Wu Qiongbai was related to that question. She liked him, she treated him well, and he also liked her. At least, he used to like her, so what could he do? Place righteousness before family? Su Li had not killed the demon princess, so what could Biyanghong do to Wu Qiongbai? Even if the entire world was about to be destroyed, what could he do? To be continued. Chapter 182. After finishing her bun, Wu Qiongbai raised her head to Chen Chongqing and Xian Yuanpo and said, "All of you say that I'm a bad person, so I'll continue to be a bad person. What can you do to me?" As she said this, her face was expressionless, but her eyes were filled with derision and contempt. Xian Yuanpo was silent, as was Chen Chongqing. Wu Qiongbai suddenly grew angry and harshly yelled, "Aren't you afraid that after I recover, I'll cut off Guanbai's arm as well?" Chen Chongqing remained silent, but Xian Yuanpo incredulously asked, "How can you be so bad?" Wu Qiongbai was very satisfied with his reaction. "No matter how bad I am, he still likes me. Is that not enough?" After saying this, she gave a pleased smile. Her beautiful face was deathly pale, the red oil smeared on it like blood. It was an abnormally cruel and terrifying sight. Chen Chongqing stared into her eyes and vaguely guessed at what she wanted to do. Suddenly feeling very depressed, he got up and walked out of the room. Wu Qiongbay's face revealed a hint of shock as she watched him leave. She yelled, "Why are you leaving?" Xian Yuanpa saw the red oil dripping from the corner of her mouth as she spoke and felt rather annoyed. He turned around and handed 2 sheets of paper to her. Wu Qiongbai did not take the paper, but stared into his eyes and asked, "All the beef buns have this much oil?" Both the question itself and her current expression seemed rather neurotic. Xian Yuanpa thought about how wretched she truly was and suppressed his emotions. "That's butter mixed with chili. Only like that can it be fragrant. You clearly know that beef buns are fragrant, so why did you only let us eat steamed buns?" Wu Qiongbay's voice suddenly became shrill as if she had gone mad. She began to wail at Xian Yuanpe. He's about to die, so what does it matter if you let him eat some beef buns? Xian Yuanpe said nothing. It wasn't that he thought she was crazy, but that he also deeply regretted this matter. In the last few days, he had bought plain steamed buns for Biyanghong and Wuqiong while he ate beef buns. It wasn't that he couldn't afford them, but that they were heavily injured and should eat lightly. But Biyanghong had still died. Since that was the case, why not happily eat a few beef buns? Wuqiong suddenly calmed down and expressionlessly said, "Die." There was a soft clap. Wuqiong raised her left hand and thrust her index finger at Xian Yuanpe. Her broken arm was severely injured and she was extremely weak. Although Xian Yuanpe was also injured, he could at least move freely. Logically speaking, he should be able to avoid this finger attack. However, this finger seemed to have some kind of magical power. It completely ignored Xian Yuanpe's subconscious reaction, and just like that, it landed between his eyebrows with incomparable precision. Wuqiong's finger seemed to have exhausted all her strength. Her face grew even paler, even faintly translucent. Xian Yuanpe let out a low howl of pain. His body trembled violently, and his body enlarged rapidly. His clothes were torn apart, and clumps of black hair poked out from the cracks. He was instantly forced into a berserk state by Wuqiong's finger. But he was still unable to escape Wuqiong's fingers, unable to even make a simple movement like shaking his head. That finger was still quietly resting between his eyebrows, as if it was stuck there. Xian Yuanpe had always been tall and sturdy, and after his berserk state, he was like a small mountain. His eyebrows could not be separated from Wuqiong's finger, so he could no longer maintain his previous posture and fell forward. But he did not fall to the ground. On the contrary, he floated up, looking like a leather bag filled with steam. Wuqiong's finger seemed to be pulling on the string of this leather bag. Chen Chongqing heard the ruckus and rushed back into the room, where he saw this strange sight. Wuqiong's finger naturally made him recall Biyanghong's finger from yesterday. Biyanghong had used that finger to pour the experience of the battle between the divine and a great deal of cultivation knowledge into his sea of consciousness. Wuqiong seemed to be doing the same thing, but there was also a clear difference. He could sense the majestic pressure of the divine, as well as the abnormally terrifying surges of true essence. A cold wind howled through the room, ruffling Biyanghong's clothes and sweeping up the dregs of crystals and the fragments of the wooden pagoda on the floor. It circled around Wuqiong and Xian Yuanpe's bodies. In an extremely short amount of time, Wuqiong had grown thinner, aged several hundred years. Traces of frost could faintly be seen in her hair, and her face was even paler and thinner, so translucent that one could almost see her muscles and bones. In truth, it was impossible to see that all that could be seen was pure and divine light. Her eyes became fervent, brimming with madness. She stared at Xian Yuanpe and harshly shouted, "If your luck is bad, then just die." With this shout, the pure and divine light pierced through her skin, transforming into countless golden shards that entered Xian Yuanpe's body. Xian Yuanpe's body began to tremble once more. His withered right arm was constantly broken and then repaired, giving off an unbearable snapping sound. His expression was one of extreme agony. Chen Chongqing sensed extreme danger, but in this situation, he did not dare to do anything. He could only nervously wait. After some time, Wuqiong drew back her finger. Xian Yuanpe fell heavily onto the ground, creating several deep gashes. Countless amounts of blood splashed out, and then he fainted just like that. Chen Chongqing rushed over to examine his injuries and angrily yelled at Wuqiong, "Have you gone mad?" He didn't know what she had passed on to Xian Yuanpe, but it was clearly countless times more dangerous than Biyanghong's methods from yesterday. In other words, when she said that she wanted Xian Yuanpe to die, she really had not been lying. Chen Chongqing was even more clear that her words just now had been meant to anger him so that he would kill her. For example, she had taunted him about suddenly repenting, or she had said that she would cut off Guan Bai's remaining arm. She truly had gone mad, but even if she wanted to die, why had she used such a method? Wuqiong Bai sat against the wall in a daze. Suddenly, she wretchedly yelled, "He's gone, and I don't want to live anymore, but I'm afraid of death, I really am afraid of death." Then she struggled to turn her head and look at the already lifeless Bi-Yang-hong. With a trembling voice, she said, "But I still want to be together with you." After saying this, she began to cry. She cried for a very long time, until her tears turned into sobs, and ultimately, there was no more sound. Chen Chongqing's body was somewhat stiff as he placed a finger under her nose. Wuqiong Bai's eyes were closed, leaning against her man. She was already dead. Chen Chongqing drew back his finger and looked outside the courtyard. The courtyard was extremely quiet. He suddenly felt rather helpless. To be continued. Chapter 183. Bi-Yang-hong was dead, and Wuqiong Bai was also dead. They had died in White Emperor City, 80,000 li from their homeland. Their souls would return to the Sea of Stars, not to Shiling's 10,000 years pavilion, so it did not matter where they were buried. There was an extremely deep fissure in the small courtyard, probably created when Chusu emerged from underground. As the Yin winds of the Earth River repaired itself, the fissure had already been filled with rock, leaving only a hole about 2 feet deep. Chen Chongqing placed Bi-Yang-hong's and Wuqiong Bai's bodies in the pit. Before he could push the earth back, a cool breeze blew through the trees of the Celestial Tree Temple, leaving only 2 patches of golden sand in the pit. When Zhu Luo died, he had seen a similar sight. He knew that this was a sign unique to experts of the divine domain, so he was not surprised. But the golden sand in the earth made him think of another matter. Even now, many people believed that the Tianhai Divine Empress had been buried in the deepest part of the Orthodox Academy, but in reality, it was in the 100 Herb Garden. He was somewhat confused as to why, after the Tianhai Divine Empress's death, her body had not transformed into the purest golden sand like the other experts of the divine domain, but had remained in its original state. Was this the difference between the concealed divinity realm and the saint realm? He did not think any further. With a wave of his sleeve, he jolted the white stones in the courtyard into the pit. Watching the golden gravel gradually disappear, he silently thought of a few names in his heart. Chusu, Madame Mu, Black Robe, the Sacred Light Continent. The entire continent had sensed the deaths of 2 experts of the divine domain. The laws of the world resonated, the omens gradually appearing. In the distant cloud grave in the east, many whirlpools appeared, and the stream flowing through that solitary peak suddenly increased in speed. A one-horned beast drinking water by the stream raised its head and gazed into the distance, a hint of loneliness appearing in its pure and holy eyes. The Red River no longer had any waves. It was as calm as a mirror, making it seem extremely strange. From the depths of the river came the low hum of the Jing, as if it was mourning something. The Archbishop of the Western Wastes, who knew the secret behind this matter, looked at the gloomy rain clouds over the small courtyard with a sorrowful expression. 2 rainbows appeared behind the rain clouds, stretching out from White Emperor City, crossing the wide river and reaching into the distant mountains, perhaps even farther. Only now did the Prime Minister of the Yao race, the Bear race Patriarch, and the Sure race Patriarch know what had happened. They were so shocked that they didn't know what to say. The priests and cultivators outside the alley, as well as the greater number of demon warriors, sensed the meaning of the 2 rainbows and dropped to their knees. The believers of the orthodoxy in the crowd began to recite the Taoist scriptures under the lead of the Archbishop, piously and reverently. Chen Chongqing did not return to the Taoist Church of the Western Wilderness, but remained in the small courtyard. This was because Xian Yuanpa had yet to awaken, and he had some matters to think about. The Prime Minister of the Yao race, the Sure clan's clan leader, and other important figures all came over. They wanted to know the details of this matter, and more importantly, They wanted to know his attitude. But he did not see them. The small courtyard once again became incomparably quiet. He sat on the edge of the wooden platform outside the house. His gaze fell from the lifeless short pine tree to the white stones and then to the gray wall, unable to be sure. He suddenly felt rather tired and lost interest in many things. Just like right now, he clearly knew that the entire demi-human race was warily and uneasily waiting for his response, but he did not want to pay them any attention. Just like many people, he very much liked and respected Byung-hong, but he was truly not familiar with him. Logically speaking, he should not have been so agitated, but in reality, his mind had been dealt a massive blow. Good people were not necessarily rewarded, and it was not even easy to live. So why must we be good people? How should we live? Why should we live? He gazed up at the night sky, thinking about this question that was often mocked by others, but in reality, everyone should carefully ponder. Tonight, there were no clouds or fog in White Emperor City, so one could see very clearly. One could see very far away, could see many stars. Chen Chongqing's spirit left his body and floated towards the sea of stars. It passed through the star that was sputtering starlight, passed through the star that had countless spiral arms, avoided the star that had a pair of bright wings, and continued forward until it passed through the invisible crystal wall and arrived at the outer sea of stars. The spiritual sense of a cultivator could only travel so far when they were fixing their fated star. Normally, when cultivating, they could only sense the existence of their fated star, but it was very difficult to reach it again. But this rule had no effect on Chen Chongqing, just like how the invisible wall of crystal could not block off his spiritual sense. Perhaps it was because his spiritual sense had always been there? A red star quietly floated in the night sky, containing a passionate energy, yet its surface was calm, as if it would not change for millions upon millions of years. This was his fated star. Chen Chongqing's spiritual sense did not fall on his fated star. This star was real, the one closest to him, but it was a place that he could never reach. Thus, this was the most false of truths, and it was easy to feel sad. He did not want to feel sad, so his spiritual sense continued forward, seeming rather cold. Ultimately, his spiritual sense arrived outside the sea of stars. On the other side, he could faintly make out many stars, like the lights of 10,000 households. Was the sacred light continent over there? He wanted to go over and take a look. At the age of 10, he learned that he was sick. From that moment on, the only thing he thought about was to continue living. On that rainy night, the Tianhai Divine Empress had reforged his meridians and broken the tribulation in his life. He could live past the age of 20, and he could still live for many more years. From that moment on, he very naturally began to ponder a few questions. Only by erasing the shadow of death could he truly and calmly observe his own life. He naturally wanted to find the source of his life, find the reason for his existence, but he had still lived a very tense life in the last few years and did not have much time. Only on the night that Byung-hong and Wuqiongbai died did he truly begin his search. Between the indistinct sea of stars in his spiritual sense was an incomparably vast and frigid black void. This was the darkest night and also the bottomless abyss. This black void was even more incorporeal, so it was impossible to pass through, as if it did not even exist. So how could it be surmounted? Chen Chongqing gazed at the center of this black void and suddenly had a very strange feeling. He felt like he was leaning over the edge of a well, his head lowered into its deepest depths. He also felt like he was standing at the bottom of the well, gazing out at the night sky. Just which feeling was right? Or was it real? After an unknown period of time, Chen Chongqing drew back his spiritual sense. He still sat where he had been, his gaze no longer wandering. He only quietly gazed at the gray wall, yet it seemed like he was simultaneously gazing at many places. The sea of stars calmed the mind, and the black void made all cultivators feel insignificant, helping them erase those distracting thoughts from their Tao hearts. The sound of footsteps came from behind him. Xian Yuanpe walked over and sat down at his side. To be continued. Chapter 184. Xian Yuanpe was still weak, even weaker than when he was washing dishes in the capital, but he was still alive. Moreover, his body was now filled with an extremely majestic spiritual essence and an incomparably terrifying divine aura. All of this came from Wuqiong Bai's finger. As long as he had enough time, he would be able to convert all the true essence into his own and comprehend the laws and principles of heaven and earth represented by the sacred aura. At that time, he would become a true expert. In a sense, Xian Yuanpe's fortuitous encounter this time was really rare, even in the entire history of the cultivation world. However, he did not rejoice because of this. Instead, he felt a little down. 2 days ago, Senior taught me something very important, but I didn't manage to learn it completely. In the end, I still lost. Xian Yuanpe lowered his head and said, "Am I very useless? Losing to a person like the Demon Lord isn't shameful. Moreover, you've succeeded in forcing them to move the transactions under the table onto the table. This is very important." Chen Chongqing said, "As for the things Senior taught you, you still have a long time to learn them. If there's anything you don't understand, just ask me." Xian Yuanpe was somewhat puzzled and said, "Ask you?" Chen Chongqing said, "Before the Senior left, he taught me a set of fist arts and indicated that it was for you." Xian Yuanpe was somewhat sad. Looking at the slightly raised ground in the courtyard, he was silent for a long time before he said, "I will study hard." Chen Chongqing said, "Senior and his wife's inheritance is now with you. In the future, if you have the chance, you should go to the 10,000 Years Pavilion and take a look." Xian Yuanpe said, "I will go as soon as possible." Chen Chongqing stood up and raised his right hand. Xian Yuanpe bowed his head. Chen Chongqing patted his shoulder, turned around and walked out of the courtyard. He did not return to the great Taoist church of the Western Wasteland to rest. Instead, he went directly to the imperial city. After saying a few somewhat sentimental words to Luoluo, he walked into that great and secret passage. As he walked out of the passageway, the snowy mountain once again came into view. However, the night was still dark and the morning light had not yet arrived. The towering mountain covered half of the starry sky, making it look like a falling star. Arriving at the black cliff on the other side of the lake, Jin Yulu came up and asked, "What happened?" This place was far from White Emperor City, but they could still sense the activity of the morning. Chen Chongqing said it. The bottom of the black cliff became extremely quiet. Xiaoda gazed at Chen Chongqing with a complicated expression. 2 human experts of the divine domain had died in White Emperor City. This would assuredly have a massive effect on their relationship with the demi-humans. Xiaoda did not know what sort of stance Chen Chongqing would adopt in the ensuing turmoil, so he was rather wary and uneasy. Between Chen Chongqing's eyebrows, one could faintly see some tiredness, but there was no anger, nor was there any hostility. It was as if he wasn't affected by this matter at all. He asked, "Any progress?" Jin Yulu shook his head and said, "Even your sword can't cut it open, there's nothing we can do." Xiaoda suddenly said, "I've thought of a way to break the array, but I don't know if it's possible." Chen Chongqing and Jin Yulu looked at him. As a true expert ranked second on the Proclamation of Liberation and also the supreme expert of the middle generation of the demi-human race, Xiaoda naturally had vast experience. Since it was his idea to break the formation, it must be logical, therefore Chen Chongqing and Jin Yulu listened attentively and seriously. The star stone is the array pivot, and this restriction is a complete array. Since it's an array, it's hard to suppress it with force. Why not break it with array formations? Xiaoda's expression was very calm. No one could tell that he was nervous. Even now, he still did not know who had written that slip of paper, whether that person had evil intentions or good intentions. After hearing this, Jin Yulu thought for a few moments, then shook his head. Using an array to break an array seems reasonable, but arrays have always been defensive, so they lack sharpness. Chen Chongqing was also considering Xiao De's suggestion. Although he knew a few sword arrays, they were far from being able to compare to the sealing array that had imprisoned the White Emperor. At this moment, he suddenly heard a very familiar word. Xiao De asked, "What if it's a sword array?" Jin Yulu froze at these words, but the more he thought, the more he felt that it was feasible. He excitedly said, "Correct, the sword array of South Stream Temple." He turned to Chen Chongqing and said, "I'll have to trouble Sir with this matter." Xiao De also looked at Chen Chongqing. The entire continent knew of the relationship between Chen Chongqing and Holy Maiden Su Yurong, so it should be very easy to invite the disciples of South Stream Temple. There's no need to go to so much trouble. Chen Chongqing's Daoist sleeve shook, and several hundred swords flew out of their sheaths like streams. They howled through the air, taking their respective positions as they quietly hovered in the night sky. At this sight, Jin Yulu and Xiao De both paled. They had not participated in the heavenly selection ceremony and had not seen Chen Chongqing's battle with the Demon Lord, so this was their first time seeing this sight. These swords were not completely the same as the sword style of the legends, and they were even more different from the swords Xiao De had seen in the alley of the Northern Military Department. If they had only seen this storm of swords, they would have found it very difficult to guess the name of this sword style, but when they thought of the conversation they had just heard, a guess very naturally appeared in their minds. Xiao De asked in a somewhat hoarse voice, "This is the sword array of South Stream Temple?" Chen Chongqing grunted in affirmation. Jin Yulu ruefully shook his head, gratified and sentimental. He was like an old wave resting on the beach, unwilling to rise again. Xiao De's expression chilled, and he said no more. He was like an iron tree that was too shy to bloom again. In the past, he had always believed that his cultivation level was higher than Chen Chongqing's, that his talent was no less. He had been unable to defeat Chen Chongqing because Su Li had passed on a sword style to him, but also because of Chen Chongqing's fortuitous encounter in the Garden of Zhou. To put it another way, this was not the fault of battle. It was just that Chen Chongqing's luck, or rather, his opportunities, far surpassed his own. But now, as he gazed at the storm of swords in the darkness, sensed the awe-inspiring sword intents and the connection between them, as well as the hidden array intent, he could no longer say such words. In just a few short years, Chen Chongqing's cultivation in the path of the sword had actually grown so powerful. Just how had he done it? Was it because the Pope could obtain the support of the entire orthodoxy, or was it because of that simplest and crudest reason? Was he just such a genius? Knowing what to do did not mean that he knew how to do it. As for how to use the South Stream Temple sword array to break the sealing array in the Black Cliff, Chen Chongqing needed an hour just to find the way. Countless awe-inspiring sword intents swept across the surface of the lake, gathering the freshest and even somewhat chilly qi in the world, and then slashing at the invisible array intent surrounding the Black Cliff. Under the pressure of the sword array, the sealing array hidden in the snowy mountain gradually revealed its true form. In the depths of the mist, one could faintly make out the projection of the starstone wall, blocking the path ahead. As time passed, the range of the sealing array grew clearer and clearer. It far surpassed the range of the snowy peak and the Black Cliff, covering a radius of 10 some li. There were even several swords within the sword array that had left the ground and were flying up into the snowy mountain. Could that place still be within the sealing array? To be continued. Chapter 185. Using an array to break an array seemed like a very simple idea, but it was actually an idea of incomparable genius, so genius that no cultivator dared to think in this direction. In essence, this was the most typical method of grinding with water. It was also like two bronze mirrors rubbing against each other. An ordinary array formation wouldn't be able to break through this array formation. That was because this bronze mirror was too smooth and its material was too ordinary. The South Stream Temple sword array was different. This sword array had the toughest and sharpest surface, most suited to grinding objects. But even the South Stream Temple sword array would not be able to break this sealing array in a short amount of time, because it required careful grinding and caution. In terms of array, Su Yorong was truly hundreds, if not thousands, of times more talented than the vast majority of cultivators in the world, including Chen Chongsheng. But Chen Chongsheng was the best person to break the array, because he alone could use the South Stream Temple sword array, and also because he possessed unimaginable patience. He closed his eyes as he sat in front of the black cliff. From the pitch-black night to the arrival of the morning light, he remained calm, no anxiety visible on his face. How could Jin Yulu and Xiaoda, sensing the dancing sword intense in the sky and seeing the unchanging black cliff, be as calm as he? If not for the fact that their spiritual senses were powerful enough to sense that the sealing array was slowly weakening, they might have been even more worried. When they saw that Chen Chongsheng remained calm, that he had not forgotten to meditate and cultivate while controlling the swords to form the South Stream Temple sword array, they felt deep admiration for him. As the morning light gradually brightened, Chen Chongsheng opened his eyes and examined the state of the sealing array in the black cliff. "I need to rest for a while. What about the two of you?" Jin Yulu and Xiaoda had already worked hard for several days and nights, without sleep or rest. They were already exhausted to the extreme, but they were not prepared to follow Chen Chongsheng back to White Emperor City. They could only be at ease after seeing the black cliff with their own eyes, and they certainly did not want the White Emperor to wake up and find that they were not there. Xiaoda said to Chen Chongsheng, "If you really can break the array, then before doing so, you must be careful of your own safety." Jin Yulu replied, "Logically speaking, if the Empress had not gone mad, she would not have killed your Holiness, the Pope, in front of everyone, but what you and I are doing right now is highly likely to drive her mad." Chen Chongsheng understood this logic. Madame Mu assuredly knew what Jin Yulu and Xiaoda were doing in the Starfall Mountains. She did not care primarily because the situation in White Emperor City was rather chaotic, making it inconvenient to disperse one's strength. More importantly, she was absolutely confident that no one on the continent could break the seal around the black cliff. However, if she suddenly discovered that someone could break the restriction, what would she do? Of course, water droplets could pierce through stone, but it would take many years. The South Stream Temple sword array could probably break the sealing array imprisoning the White Emperor. It would not need many years, but it would at least need many days. In the following days, Chen Chongsheng continued to stay in the Western Wilderness Taoist Temple. Occasionally, he would meet with some of the more important representatives of the Yao race, but most of the time, he rested. Late at night, with Luolua's help, he would enter the Imperial City and use that secret path to the distant Starfall Mountains to use the South Stream Temple sword array to break the sealing array. Other than the Shi clan leader and his group, no one else knew of this matter. Thus, in the view of many people, at this crucial moment, Chen Chongsheng, as the Pope of the human race, seemed a little too quiet. No one would take this silence to be a sign of weakness or giving up. The human race would assuredly demand an explanation and a price for the deaths of Bi Yanghong and Wu Qiongbai. At this moment, his silence placed an enormous pressure on White Emperor City. Chen Chongsheng also felt an enormous pressure because of Madame Mu's silence. His movements were very secretive and few people could discover him, but he was very sure that Madame Mu knew what he was doing. Why had Madame Mu remained so quiet these last few days, showing no reaction? Was it because she believed that the array she had constructed using the power of the tides could not be broken? But the sealing array in the Black Cliff had already been largely erased by his South Stream Temple sword array. Just what was Madame Mu thinking? Late at night, as Chen Chongsheng, dressed in a black robe, walked toward the quiet Imperial City, he was still thinking about this question. In a stone hall deep within the Imperial City, Madame Mu slowly opened her eyes. Her eyes were devoid of emotion, her thoughts a mystery. The hard stone floor still bore the scars of the battle from a few days ago. Cracks and shallow holes left by stone were everywhere, and the walls were also somewhat mottled. It seemed like the wind and rain from the western sea had eroded it for tens of thousands of years, making it seem especially old. Chen Chongqing drew his gaze away from the walls and gazed into the depths of the imperial city. In this imperial city, many eunuchs, maids, and beast guards were loyal to Luoluo. As the situation became more and more obvious, Luoluo received more and more support, making it easier for him to enter and leave the imperial city. But he still did not believe that Luoluo's control over the imperial city had already surpassed her mother's. He knew that Madame Mu was probably watching him from some place in the palace. It was just like he had felt a few days ago when he had walked into the imperial city. That gaze from the depths of the darkness was so indifferent and devoid of emotion that it was simply impossible to fathom her true thoughts. In the last few days, he had been waiting for her to suddenly appear in the darkness, but this scene had not occurred. Suddenly, he sensed that Madame Mu's gaze had left him. What did this mean? Had the silence and peace of the last few days finally come to an end? Countless holes were suddenly torn in the darkness in front of the imperial city. Countless black masks had been lifted, revealing cold and bright eyes. Even the intangible qi of the world was disrupted. The starlight descending from the night sky was slightly scattered. Several dozen demi-human experts appeared out of the darkness and surrounded Chen Chongqing. The attendants preparing to enter the palace with Chen Chongqing fled in fear. The demi-human expert at the very front was extremely large and exuded a terrifying pressure. He was called Xiang Qiu, the youngest son of the Xiang clan leader, and also the strongest expert of this generation of the Xiang clan. Ever since he was a child, he had cultivated secret techniques deep in the mountains and rarely returned to White Emperor City, much less appeared before the eyes of the common people. Whenever he appeared, he was an unshakable mountain. Chen Chongqing stood in the shadow of this mountain, calm and silent. Xiang Qiu looked down at him and said in a chilly voice, "Your Holiness the Pope has disguised yourself and charged into the palace. For what purpose?" Before Chen Chongqing could speak, a clear and young voice brimming with dignity rang out. "If I invite teacher into the palace, do I need to report to someone in advance?" Luoluo walked out of the imperial city, accompanied by several dozen eunuchs and palace maids. Their footsteps were very dense. Soon after, even more dense footsteps came from behind, as well as the stamping of hooves, which gradually turned into a torrential rain and the faint rumble of thunder. More than 1,000 elite demi-human soldiers surged out of Heavenguard Pavilion like a tide, their cold spears like a forest pointed at the demi-human experts. Xiang Qiu turned to the bear tribe leader at the front of the cavalry and narrowed his eyes. "Do you want to rebel?" Footsteps and the stamping of hooves once more resounded through the darkness around the imperial city. More and more demi-human soldiers were gathering. The noise in front of the imperial city was getting more and more chaotic, but it seemed to be getting quieter and quieter. Perhaps it was because the atmosphere was getting more and more tense, more and more oppressive. No sound came from the depths of the imperial city. To be continued. Chapter 186. An even more majestic mountain appeared in front of the imperial city. It was the Xiang clan leader. He indifferently said to Chen Chongqing, "It is already late at night. Not even His Holiness the Pope can enter the palace." He then turned to Luoluo and said, "Your Highness, you still need to consider the dignity of the White Emperor clan in your actions." These words sounded indifferent, but they were actually very serious. Luoluo looked at this elder, who had doted on her ever since she was a child, and suddenly felt that his face was very unfamiliar. Chen Chongqing knew of the Xiang clan leader's status in the Council of Elders, and he could clearly sense his unfathomable strength. But his reaction was still very calm, very direct, and very unyielding. It was like a shallow stream. The water surface was like a mirror, and the bottom could be seen clearly. Between the fish there were hard rock. He said, "I want to use the path in the Imperial City to go to the Starfall Mountains to see His Majesty, the White Emperor." "Why are you stopping me?" The Xiong clan leader's expression chilled. He had never imagined that Chen Chongqing would confess to his intentions. Then, he suddenly realized that this question was very difficult to answer. Under the current tense situation, Chen Chongqing wanting to enter the Imperial City in the middle of the night was very suspicious no matter how one looked at it. He had enough reasons to object. But when Chen Chongqing expressed his intentions, those reasons for opposing him suddenly became less powerful. Why hadn't he thought of this before? The Xiong clan leader stared into Chen Chongqing's incomparably clear and calm eyes, thinking to himself, is it really true that the simpler one is, the harder it is to be confused by the miasma? But he still wanted to stop Chen Chongqing from entering the Imperial City. The entire continent knows that His Majesty is quietly recuperating from his injuries. He is at a critical juncture and cannot be disturbed. His Holiness the Pope insists on seeing him. Just what are his intentions? The alliance between the two races concerns the safety of the continent. His Majesty the White Emperor cares deeply about the world, so how could he only focus on recuperating and completely ignore it? Chen Chongqing looked at him and said, "What are your intentions in not letting me see His Majesty? Are you afraid or guilty?" Although this sentence was not explained, the meaning was very clear. Who wouldn't understand? The wind in front of the Imperial City seemed to instantly become several degrees colder. Xiang Qiu angrily rebuked, "Don't you dare slander me." Chen Chongqing looked at the Xiong clan leader and continued to ask, "Is this your idea or Madame Mu's? What is the meaning of this?" He completely ignored Xiang Qiu. As the Pope, the only person in White Emperor City who had the right to speak on equal terms with him was Madame Mu. The Xiong clan leader was the head of the #1 clan of the demi-human race, and also the chief elder of the Council of Elders. Xiang Qiu was only the son of the Xiong clan leader. No matter how strong he was, what right did he have to have Chen Chongqing respond to his words? For Chen Chongqing, this wasn't deliberate disregard. It was a very normal reaction, but for Xiang Qiu, this was a great humiliation. When he noticed the change in the situation, his expression became unsightly to the extreme, and his aura became more and more gloomy. The experts who tore through the night with him, and prepared to launch a historic siege, still remained silent and solemn. However, the expressions of the cavalry generals who were accompanying them had clearly changed. Before Chen Chongqing said these words, no one in the demi-human race was worried about the White Emperor's safety, much less thinking about those terrifying schemes. The White Thearcha's position in the demon race was too revered. He was like a god. No one would have thought that he would be harmed by a conspiracy. Of course, the fact that Chen Chongqing's words could affect the situation was also related to his status. The words of the Pope and the words of an ordinary passerby naturally had a vastly different effect. More importantly, in the last few months, the entire continent had been talking about the story of the cinnabar pill and the legend of the Pope using his blood to save the people of the world. And because of his past experiences, the demi-human race had an extremely good impression of Chen Chongqing and did not believe that he would lie. Chen Chongqing did not wait for the mood in front of the Imperial City to become even more complicated, nor did he wait for his question to be answered. "No one can stop me from seeing His Majesty the White Emperor." He looked into the Xiong clan leader's eyes and seriously said, "Not unless you kill me." After saying this, he walked forward. The Imperial City shrouded in darkness was extremely quiet. His footsteps could be heard clearly. Several thousand elite demi-human cavalry and the demi-human experts that had either been hiding in the darkness or had revealed themselves were silently and nervously confronting each other. The same blood flowed through their bodies, and they were also sweating the same cold sweat. As Chen Chongqing's footsteps approached, The atmosphere in the imperial city grew more and more tense. As Chen Chongqing got closer and closer, the Xiang clan leader's expression grew more and more solemn. As he watched Chen Chongqing get further and further away, Xiang Qiu's complexion grew gloomier and gloomier. Chen Chongqing's words might have made some people suspicious, perhaps even changed their attitudes, but they believed that they had the ability to detain Chen Chongqing. They could even kill Chen Chongqing. And they were not afraid of killing Chen Chongqing, because they were all furious. In their view, Chen Chongqing was far too sinister. He was nothing like the Pope, more like the legendary demon military advisor Black Robe. How could he use such shameless lies to frame and slander them? The Red River Beast Guard in front of the imperial city silently opened a path, parting like a tide. Chen Chongqing walked past the Xiang clan leader, not even glancing at him. Xiang Qiu groaned at this sight, a trickle of blood trickling from the corner of his lips. He had actually suffered a hidden injury. Even so, neither he nor his father attacked Chen Chongqing. Because the depths of the imperial city remained quiet in the darkness, not a single sound emerging from them. Just like this, Chen Chongqing walked into the imperial city, just as he had done several nights ago. When he was still a young Taoist from Xining village, he had also walked into the capital with this calm gaze and firm expression. And then, he saw Madame Mu, under a pear tree in front of a stone hall. It was not the season for pear trees to bloom, but since the pear tree on the observation platform had bloomed, this pear tree was naturally blooming. A breeze blew, perhaps from the Starfall Mountains in the north or the Great Sea in the west. Countless white flowers fell from the branches, sprinkling on the ground and also on her body. A small white flower fell precisely on her hair, swaying in the wind. It was very beautiful, but also seemed to contain a tinge of sorrow. Her white dress was very simple and clean, but it also seemed extremely solemn. Her eyes were very black and bright, reflecting the starlight. They were extremely serene, seeming to contain the secrets of the heavens, but also like murderous intent. Her expression was very indifferent, but it also concealed an extremely faint hint of sorrow. Had someone died? Was she going to mourn? Was it that imperial uncle from the great western continent called Mu? Or someone even closer? Or was it his future self? Chen Chongqing thought of this question, but he did not want to know the answer. To be continued. Chapter 187. The Story of Choosing Heaven has released its first trailer. To be precise, it's a trailer. It's very short, but just like me, we're mainly looking at the aura. It's not bad. I've posted it on my official WeChat account and Weibo. Everyone can go take a look. As he gazed at the pear tree in front of the night hall and the pear blossoms falling on Madame Mu's body, Chen Chongqing very naturally recalled the sight he had seen a few days ago. The pear tree on the observation deck had been chopped into invisible dust by his sword. He had learned the story of the man in the painting through Luoluo. While he was moved by Luoluo's deep affection, he also thought about how Madame Mu had expended considerable effort to have Luoluo accept the Demon Lord. She should love her only daughter very much, so why was she so heartless in this marriage? If that conjecture was true, then why was she so cold-blooded after being in love with Bai Di for so many years? What kind of person was she? The Xiang clan is just like their bodies, tall, heavy and cold like uninteresting mountains. Madame Mu said, "Your Holiness the Pope was able to ignore their existences and come here. Your methods are truly impressive." She was praising Chen Chongqing, but her line of sight didn't fall upon him. Instead, she was still looking into the distance in the darkness. That should be the north side. When I was very young, my teacher used a sentence to praise senior brother. At the same time, it was also to educate me. That sentence was 1,000 words are not equal to a single silence. Chen Chongqing said, "From then on, I spoke much less, but in the end, I'm still not as good as my senior. I can't help but want to talk." I want to talk to the fish in the stream, I want to talk to the books in the temple, and every time I do that, I would feel guilty. Even now, when I talk to 36, I still have this feeling. Madame Mu replied, His Majesty the Emperor has always been a mute. Senior brother comforted me in the same way. Chen Chongqing was silent for a while, then he continued, so later on, I changed that sentence into one word, and followed it accordingly. Madame Mu asked, which character? Chen Chongqing said, thousands of words cannot be said all at once. Madame Mu slowly arched her brows and asked, Wang Po's straight? Chen Chongqing said, correct. I can't be conservative and inflexible. If I think too much and say too much, it's easy for me to make too many mistakes. Since that's the case, why not be more direct? As long as you believe that what you're doing is reasonable, then just do it. Madame Mu replied, This is a right and wrong, that is also a right and wrong. Chen Chongqing said, But at least Wang Po and I believe in right and wrong. Madame Mu continued, So tonight, you can cut straight to the chase and come before me? Chen Chongqing said, If you hold your sword and walk straight, you will usually reach your destination faster. Madame Mu sighed, I have cultivated my entire life without hindrance, but I truly am prone to wavering in my decisions. Perhaps this is the innate weakness of women? Mother, Luoluo called out softly, wanting to say something but hesitating. Madame Mu's lips perked up, her voice tinged with derision as she said, In truth, a girl's extroversion is also a weakness. Luoluo was a little sad and didn't say anything. His Holiness the Pope is right. We should be more straightforward when doing things. Madame Mu said, On that day on the observation platform, I should have just killed you. As she spoke, she still did not look at Chen Chongqing, but into the distance in the darkness. In the depths of her eyes was an extremely faint hint of exhaustion and regret. Was she regretting that she had not killed Chen Chongqing that day, or was she regretting something else? Just where was she looking at? On this side of the sea, on the other side of the mountain, across from the lake was a black cliff, the cliff covered in ice and snow that had accumulated for tens of thousands of years. Her gaze had always rested on this place, her regret deepening, her emotions fading, and her killing intent rising. A wind blew in from the western sea. The countless snowy peaks under the night sky did not change, but the ice and snow that had accumulated on the black cliff for tens of thousands of years rustled down. The ice and snow were torn to shreds by the cold wind and then swirled up, howling against the cliff and the surrounding trees. Xiaoda waved his hand and pulverized a thick and heavy tree. He raised his head in the direction of White Emperor City, the brown and yellow in his eyes growing deeper and deeper, making him seem extremely ruthless. Jin Yulu stood behind him, squinting in the same direction, his gaze cold and sharp to the extreme. They could sense the boundless divine might contained in the sea wind, but they would not retreat a single step. They were prepared to fight to the death. The White Emperor was in the black cliff behind them. Chen Chongqing had already used the South Stream Temple sword array to gradually grind out a weak spot in the ceiling array. With just a little more time, they would be able to see the White Emperor. Even if their and Chen Chongqing's worst guesses came true, they would at least be able to prove Madame Mu's scheme. Madame Mu could not just watch as this scene unfolded. She would definitely stop it all. Xiaoda and Jin Yulu had already mentally prepared themselves for this. In the last few days, when Chen Chongqing had been sitting in front of the black cliff, resisting the ceiling array, they had been silently watching their surroundings. They were waiting for the countless demi-human experts to surge in like a tide, waiting for the demi-human army to cover the entire mountain like black snow. They were waiting for Madame Mu to personally act. Just like now. In the next moment, the ice and snow falling from the cliff suddenly vanished, as did the howling. Everything became quiet. It was like that wind from the western sea had never appeared, that it had always been chasing after the clouds over the sea. Xiaoda and Jin Yulu glanced at each other. They were very confused, but they did not let down their guard. On the contrary, they felt even more uneasy. Since you wanted to kill me, why did you change your mind? Chen Chongqing did not know what had happened in the Starfall Mountains, but he could sense the change in Madame Mu's qi. More importantly, outside the Imperial City, the Xiong clan leader and those demi-human experts that had torn through the darkness had indicated that she truly did want to kill him. But in the end, the Xiong clan leader and those demi-human experts did not attack Chen Chongqing, only silently watched as he walked into the Imperial City. Madame Mu finally drew back her gaze from the distant mountains. She looked at Chen Chongqing and said, "Your Holiness, the Pope's question sounds very much like an invitation." Chen Chongqing replied, "If you can bear the consequences." Madame Mu fell quiet for a while, then asked, "Besides that teacher of yours, who else can bear it?" Chen Chongqing replied, "But there are still many people that want to kill me, perhaps because they have nothing to worry about." "If there is nothing to worry about, there is naturally nothing to worry about," Madame Mu said. "I do not like this place, never have, but in this world, there will always be something to worry about." As she said this, she did not look at Luoluo, but at White Emperor City in the darkness. But in truth, she might have been looking even further away. The world was vast and all living things were within it. Although the great western continent was far away, it was also within it. Luoluo lowered her head, her mood even sadder. In truth, in those years, I always envied Tianhai, because whether in terms of cultivation or willpower, she was infinitely close to the shore of freedom. There were even times when her existence made me doubt the views I had formed when I was a child. Madame Mu looked at Chen Chongqing and said, "But in the end, she still died at your hand." Chen Chongqing said nothing. Madame Mu finally said, "This matter taught me a lesson and also made me understand many things. Since we cultivate the heavenly Tao, and the heavenly Tao is emotionless, then if we want to last and finally reach the great Tao, we must sever all emotions and extinguish our natures." Chapter 188. All was quiet. The wind rustled the pear tree. The answer was revealed. Luoluo lowered her head even more. Chen Chongqing was quiet for a very long time. Finally, he said, "If Empress is willing, I can treat it as if nothing happened." Madame Mu asked, "What comes after the word willing?" Chen Chongqing replied, "Our two races were originally companions, comrades in arms. We have a common enemy." Madame Mu smirked. "You speak of that person?" Chen Chongqing replied, "Correct, the demon lord should still be in White Emperor City, along with those two foreigners." That was the invitation he was issuing. He was inviting Madame Mu to kill with him. He did not want to kill an ordinary person, but the sovereign of the north of the continent, an existence as vast as the darkness. As for those two foreigners from the distant continent, they were even more unimaginable existences. Madame Mu was quiet for a while, then asked, "If I accept His Holiness's invitation, then what?" Chen Chongqing replied, "There is no then." Luoluo did not understand the conversation between her teacher and her mother. Madame Mu naturally understood. Chen Chongqing's meaning was very clear. If she accepted this invitation, he would no longer care about that black cliff. Whether the White Emperor lived or died, whether he could escape, had nothing to do with him. A mocking smile appeared on Madame Mu's lip. "In the end, you've still matured." She looked at Chen Chongqing and asked, "Are you not afraid of becoming what you most loathed?" Chen Chongqing thought about the conversations he had with Tang 36 by the lake and the stream. He thought about the golden carp that was sinking into the mud. He was silent for a long time and said, "At some important moments, you have to learn how to give up." Madame Mu said, "I believe that is the greatest characteristic of maturity or decay." Chen Chongqing fell silent for another very long time. He thought about Biyonghong and Wuqiong Bai who had just left this world. He thought about tensome rebellious princes entering the capital, the Tianhai Divine Empress standing on the mausoleum of books, the lotus sea before the divine path, many red flowers. "You're right. I shouldn't think this way. After saying this, he suddenly felt his entire body relax, even his sea of consciousness becoming much clearer. Madame Mu slightly arched her brows. She had not expected him to change his mind so quickly. A moment ago, he had been thinking about schemes and methods, compromise and sacrifice, but now, he had thrown all these thoughts to the back of his mind. Such capriciousness, in the eyes of many, should be the style of villains and women. Chen Chongqing wasn't. He was just climbing an extremely steep and lonely peak. He walked in silence for a long time, feeling a little lonely and tired. So he looked out of the cliff. Then I'll take my leave. Chen Chongqing said to Madame Mu, Madame is right. I should say these words after seeing His Majesty the White Emperor. Madame Mu's expression chilled as she said, His Majesty will not see you. Chen Chongqing thought for a while and said, Maybe it's because he can't see me right now? Madame Mu looked into his eyes and asked, If things really are as you think and he's already dead, what will you do? Hearing these words, Luoluo raised her head. Her face was whiter than the pear blossoms falling from the branches. The matter of you imprisoning the Black Frost Dragon will spread to both shores of the Red River as quickly as possible. Chen Chongqing continued, Then I will announce that you have colluded with the demons and become an enemy of the orthodoxy. Madame Mu smiled. Do you think I care about these things? Of Chen Chongqing's 2 sentences, the first was to incite the rage of the demi-human populace against her, while the second was to light a fire over the entire continent. But she was the empress of the demi-humans, and also a saint. She had the confidence to ignore the wildfire rising from the mountains, rivers, and lake. Chen Chongqing said, I don't know if you care, because even now, no one seems to know just what you care about. The negotiations came to an end, but it could not be said to have broken down. Because from start to finish, neither side in the negotiations had clearly stated their conditions. From a certain perspective, they were both negotiating with themselves. This was not a very difficult matter to understand. To speak to the world was often to speak to oneself. Convincing the other party was far less important than convincing oneself. In the end, Madame Mu withdrew her hand and Chen Chongqing withdrew his invitation, not because he had been convinced, but because they had convinced themselves. Chen Chongqing used a secret path to the Starfall Mountains. Everything was already revealed to the starry sky, so Luoluo followed. The quiet imperial city seemed even quieter and more spacious. Madame Mu's figure seemed even more lonely and cold. Mu Jiushi walked out of the hall and stood at her side, her face brimming with worry. Madame Mu smiled at her and said, Do you feel that your aunt is very pitiful? Mu Jiushi subconsciously nodded, and then she came to her senses and repeatedly shook her head. The Tianhai Divine Empress was dead and the Holy Maiden of the South had gone to the distant continent. In the present world, Madame Mu was the woman with the most noble status. But in Mu Jiushi's eyes, her aunt was truly very pitiful, because she was lonely. If you want to achieve something, you need to endure something. This principle is very simple. Madame Mu caressed her face and said, Tomorrow you should go back, because I don't want you to endure this. Mu Jiushi was shocked by these words, thinking, has the situation already worsened to this level? Her voice trembled as she said, Why don't we fight? In her view, this was the best chance to kill Chen Chongqing, and she could even use Xuelao City as a buffer. If the human race reacted and sent more experts, what would they do then? How could Madame Mu not understand the principle of cutting a tangled knot with a swift blade? But Xianyuan Po's appearance had disrupted the progress of the heavenly selection ceremony, and Chen Chongqing had arrived too quickly, directly altering the entire situation. Most importantly, even if that person's thoughts had not completely changed, they had assuredly been affected. With the arrival of the morning light, countless swords flew through the air, returning to their sheaths like streams of light, concealing their sharpness. Chen Chongqing stood up and gazed at the black cliff. His face was rather tired, but his eyes were very bright. Even with the South Stream Temple sword array as a tool, breaking this sealing array that was on par with the Tong Palace was still a very difficult task. But everything was developing in a good direction. With just a little more time, they would probably see the answer. Jin Yulu was an elder who had participated in the northern expedition against the demons and had seen countless schemes and unimaginable incidents. He was not delighted by this progress, but his expression grew even more solemn. He said to Chen Chongqing, "Last night, the Empress clearly wanted to kill, but in the end, she did not strike. The reason must be found." Xiaoda added, "The experts of the Xiang clan suddenly retreated. 3 armies were advancing on White Emperor City, but they suddenly stopped 200 li away. There seems to be a faint strength on the 2 shores of the Red River that changed the decision of Madame Mu and the Council of Elders. The change in the situation last night was advantageous to them, but it still made them extremely wary. The White Emperor was trapped, his fate unknown. Just where did this powerful and mysterious strength come from? Naturally, their gazes were cast to the north, in the direction of the distant Xuelao city. When Chen Chongqing returned to White Emperor City, he received an invitation. This invitation had come from the large courtyard extremely close to the Xiang clan's estate. But in reality, everyone knew that this invitation had also come from the north, from Xuelao City. The demon lord invited Chen Chongqing to meet. Chen Chongqing thought it over, then accepted the invitation. However, he set the time for 4 days. 4 days quickly passed. A heavy snowfall fell over White Emperor City. To be continued. Chapter 189. On a certain day long after that, the demon Lord Nero watched as the blizzard descended from the sky and was swallowed up by the abyss behind the demon palace. Suddenly, he recalled that snowstorm in White Emperor City. Xuelao City was plagued by snowstorms all year round. He had seen countless blizzards, but none of them left as deep an impression on him as that snowstorm. White Emperor City was located in the south, with a warm climate and its proximity to the Western Sea, so it rarely snowed, but that snowstorm had been extremely heavy that day. In just half a night, the city by the Red River had been covered in snow, and the yellow sand in that courtyard had been dyed white. The demon lord drew back his gaze from the abyss and said to Chen Chongqing, "I was wrong. That day I should have paid any price to kill you." Nank indifferently replied, "I also thought the same." Chen Chongqing was covered in blood, but his expression was very calm. "That's already in the past." In that snowstorm that had been going on for a very long time, Chen Chongqing arrived at the courtyard not far from the Xiang clan's estate. The demon lord truly had no intention of killing him, at least not at the very start. Chen Chongqing pushed open the gate to the courtyard and walked in. The soles of his boots crunched against the soft new snow, a very pleasant sound. He was still wearing a plain Taoist robe, but he had added a large cloak over it. The cold wind rustled the snow on the ground, quickly erasing his footprints and lifting up a corner of the cloak. Deep within the courtyard was a tree, and beneath the tree was a small clay stove. There was tea on the stove, and there were 2 seats between the stoves. The demon lord sat on the seat to the north. The seat to the south was empty. Chen Chongqing walked under the tree. The tea in the pot just happened to begin to boil, giving off a pleasant sound. It was just like the demon lord's voice. 1,000 years. Chen Chongqing understood the meaning of the demon lord's words. He believed that those who knew about today's conversation would have similar sentiments at this time. A full 1,000 years ago, Emperor Taizong and the previous demon lord had a conversation in Luoyang. That conversation was so famous that no one on the continent did not know of it. Even after 1,000 years, it was still a topic that many people recalled and sighed with emotion. Even after tens of thousands of years, this conversation would probably still occupy the most important chapter in the annals of history. This conversation would decide the future state of the entire continent. The humans submitted and paid tribute, while the demon wolf cavalry returned to the north. To the human race, this conversation should have been the greatest humiliation, but because Zhou Dufu had appeared in the willows, it had a different meaning. From this perspective, this conversation was not just between Emperor Taizong and the previous demon lord, but a conversation between three great men. After 1,000 years, the leader of the human race and the sovereign of the demon lord finally met once more, and they were about to have a conversation. How could they not feel perplexed? Chen Chongqing said, "There are no bystanders in our conversation today, so we may soon disappear into history." The demon lord replied, "In the future, I will have the scribe record our conversation today, and request that every child be able to recite it." Chen Chongqing shook his head and said, "I won't do that because I don't think it's important." The posture of these two sentences was completely different, but the meaning was very similar. Both the demon lord and Chen Chongqing exuded an extremely powerful, even terrifying confidence. How the history books recorded it, or whether to record it or not, was the right of the victor. After the initial conversation ended, the courtyard remained quiet for a very long time. The tea on the stove was incessantly boiling, but the demon lord had no intention of pouring tea. He only calmly gazed at Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing was also calmly gazing at the demon lord. This was not his first meeting with the demon lord. To be more precise, it was his third time. But this was his first time clearly seeing the demon lord's face. Just like the vast majority of the demon imperial family, the demon lord's face was extremely pale. It was not like jade, not like snow, but rather strange. But it was not a sickly appearance, more like a sign that he was different from the world, giving off an inhuman feeling. The demon lord suddenly laughed. His smile was rather strange, revealing more of his gums. Contrasting with his pale complexion, it was not particularly unsightly, but rather bloody. "You truly are an interesting person," the demon lord said, "or perhaps you are not human, because your body does not have the qi of a human. You are more like an object?" Chen Chongqing had thought that the demon lord might vaguely know of his origins, perhaps even more so. But it did not matter. Whether it was an object or a fruit, the demon lord knew who he was, and that was enough. His Tao heart would naturally not be disturbed by a few words. The demon lord saw that Chen Chongqing did not respond, and his smile faded. He indifferently said, "I came to White Emperor City this time mainly for 3 matters." Based on his solemn tone, it was assuredly a major matter. Chen Chongqing thought about it, but he could only think of one. The demon lord naturally would not speak of what had happened in the wildfire of the celestial tree. He said, "Up until now, I have completed 1.5, and then today." Chen Chongqing asked, "It has something to do with me?" The demon lord replied, "Of course, because the most important matter is to see you." Chen Chongqing asked, "When you left Shuilao City, you were sure that you would meet me here?" The demon lord replied, "I was prepared to marry Princess Luoluo and the demi-human race was prepared to ally with me. You would definitely come, so we would definitely meet." Chen Chongqing asked, "Why must you meet me?" The demon lord replied, "I thought that if I could not kill you, I would ask you a question." Chen Chongqing asked, "What question?" The demon lord asked, "What is the goal of our lives?" Chen Chongqing fell silent. A few days ago, after Byonghong had left the world, he had sat in the courtyard, gazing at the countless stars in the night sky, sensing that black nothingness that was like the mouth of a well. He had once thought of this question. In truth, in the many nights after the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, he had thought of this question. In the view of many people, this question was too abstruse, a little sour, and the scholarly spirit that made one want to laugh. But this was truly a question worth thinking about. People like him and the demon lord naturally understood this principle. In different positions, one must do different things, consider different problems. The demon lord indifferently said, "We are the highest existences in the world, so we must see the furthest." Chen Chongqing fell quiet for a while, then asked, Where does your gaze fall? The demon lord replied, above the sea of stars. Chen Chongqing understood what he meant. The demon lord added, and for all autumns and generations to come. Any other ordinary person would definitely not have understood this conversation, but the demon lord knew that Chen Chongqing could assuredly understand. Chen Chongqing truly did understand because this was also what he thought, because he was the Pope of the human race. The demon lord explained, this is responsibility and also pressure, but it is also the greatest source of pleasure, the firmest meaning of existence. Just what is above the sea of stars? The other races of the sacred light continent? Chen Chongqing calmly stared into the demon lord's eyes and asked, just what is your relationship with them? What is a fire thief? To be continued. Chapter 190. The demon lord calmly gazed at him for a very long time, then he suddenly laughed. The gums revealed in his smile and his pale face made Chen Chongqing think of the words snow white and blood red. In the end, the demon lord gave no explanation, only saying, you only need to know that I was born and raised on this continent. Chen Chongqing recalled the words Wang Jitsa had written in his notebook. Position is relative. The demon lord's meaning was clear. Since he was from this side, he was not from that side. This sounded like nonsense, but in fact, it was the most important statement. Chen Chongqing saw endless ambition and almost divine callousness in the demon lord's eyes. He saw calm and indifference, but he saw no lies. He was quiet for a while, then said, I have some thoughts about the sacred light continent. A hint of admiration flashed through the depths of the demon lord's eyes, but it quickly transformed into a chill. He understood Chen Chongqing's meaning, because he also had his own thoughts on this matter. It was precisely because of this that he was even more wary of Chen Chongqing. Whether it was Shang Xingzhou, the white emperor couple, Black Robe, or the demon commander, no matter how cunning and farsighted they were, the demon lord did not particularly care. He was still young and had plenty of time to grow. Moreover, it was precisely because he was young that he possessed many of the qualities that those elders had lost. But now, he was facing the similarly young Chen Chongqing, and he could also see those qualities on his opponent's body. This made him feel rather uneasy. But now was not the time for them to meet to the death, because this conversation was not over. It could even be said that it had only just begun. If, in the end, Chen Chongqing still could not give him an answer that satisfied him, they would discuss it again. Have you ever considered joining hands with me to do some things? The demon lord used a very casual tone to raise the truly important question of the day. Chen Chongqing did not think for very long before giving his answer. The hatred between the two sides is too deep. No one has the right to negotiate peace, not even the thought of it. The demon lord shook his head. People like Tang Second naturally do not have the right because they are subjects. As long as they have this thought, they will be disloyal. But we are different because we are sovereigns. We are the guides that lead our people forward, so we naturally have the right to choose our path. As he watched the snowflakes that instantly melted on the teapot, Chen Chongqing recalled the conversation he had not long ago in the Tang clan's old estate in Wenshui City. The snow that day was also quite heavy, and they talked about the same topic. It was not particularly silent, but it was bone-chilling cold. What would the future of the continent look like? What kind of relationship should the three races have? Countless sages and sages had thought of these questions. Although the answer was a little difficult to say, it didn't need to be said. Everyone knew that it should be peace. But in the Tang clan's old estate in Wenshui City, the Tang Old Master had said a few words that indicated that this was, at least for now, impossible. In the hundreds of years that he could see, it was impossible. Chen Chongqing thought of the siege of Luoyang and said, Demons eat humans. The demon lord looked into his eyes and said, I won't eat. Chen Chongqing said, Hatred won't disappear because of this. Your people won't forget what happened in the northern expedition just because I didn't slaughter your tribe. The demon lord replied, The demi-human race can forget the hatred of the past, so why can't the human race? After all, it's just a matter of time. Chen Chongqing said, perhaps after many years, the human race really will be able to forget the hatred of the past, but it's very difficult right now. Not even I can do it. The demon lord arched his brows. You didn't experience my race's invasion of the South, and you lived in the era when the human race was the most glorious. I don't understand where your hatred comes from. I've read many books, and many stories of the past are recorded in these books. I have the deepest memory of one of these stories. Chen Chongqing thought of the history of the previous dynasty he had read in the library of the Orthodox Academy. After a moment of silence, he continued, when the demons invaded the South, their momentum was like a raging fire. The human race coincided with internal strife and was powerless to resist. The divine General Li of the previous dynasty led 3,000 elite cavalry to defend Snowhold Pass. Isolated and helpless, he managed to hold on for a year, until Chen Xuanba appeared. The demon lord narrowed his eyes, a cold light flashing through them. There was no one on the continent who did not know of this famous defense of the city, and it had given rise to a massive controversy that was still debated to this day. Even the debaters of Shuilao City would often bring up this matter to discuss. Just what did Chen Chongqing mean by suddenly bringing it up? It was not a defense, but a defense to the death. Chen Chongqing picked up the teapot on the stove and poured himself a cup of tea. Then, he looked at the snowflakes that fell into the teacup and melted, remaining silent for a very long time. In the past, Snowhold Pass might have been covered in such cold snow every day. Would those soldiers and commoners have had a cup of hot tea to drink? Naturally not, because there was no more food and the barks of the trees had been stripped bare. It was even worse than the siege of Luoyang. When Chen Xuanba led his cavalry to drive away the demon wolf cavalry and entered Snowhold Pass, he saw a scene from hell on earth. Of the 3,000 elite cavalry, 1,400 had survived, but many of the commoners, women and children, had died, and it was said that many had been eaten. The person who had beheaded his concubine and distributed her flesh to the soldiers was Li Sun, who had always been famed for his benevolence. This matter had given rise to a massive controversy. Even now, 1,000 years later, it was still being discussed. Those people back then probably did not know whether they had done the right thing or not, right? Snowhold Pass had to be defended, or else the demon wolf cavalry would be able to march straight in and threaten the heart of the human race. Tianliang County would no longer have any chance to breathe, and the human race would not be able to hold on until the turning point. But was this the right thing to do? Even the scholar who most hated the demons, even Chen Xuanba who most loved and respected Li Sun, could only remain silent on this question. But the majority of the people involved no longer needed to know the answer. When the siege of Snowhold Pass was broken, Li Sun committed suicide on the spot. From the deputy general to the lowest soldier, the 1,000-some soldiers had died on the battlefield. Chen Chongqing said to the demon lord, I do not know how to evaluate them. The demons ate people, and they also ate people, and they ate their own kind, but what if they had not been able to defend Snowhold Pass? You would have eaten even more people. The demon lord asked, So you hate my divine race so much? I did not make it clear before. This is not hate. Chen Chongqing fell quiet for a while, then continued, I just want to strive so that such a tragedy will never again occur in the human race, so that there will never be a need to evaluate such a thing again. The meaning of his words was crystal clear. If such a tragedy that was difficult to evaluate would occur in future history, he hoped that it would occur on the side of the demons, not the side of the humans. To be continued. Chapter 191. Chen Chongqing was not Shang Xingzhou. He did not have the ambition or will to completely exterminate the demon race, but he had his own ideas. He hoped that the demon race would become extremely weak, so weak that they would not dare to have any other thoughts about the human race for the foreseeable future. The demon lord had a very calm expression, devoid of anger. And then you will open trade with us, the two imperial clans can even intermarry, and you will forcefully ban the divine race's language and characters, leaving only those paintings and statues? Very coincidentally, this is also my plan. Chen Chongqing silently gazed at the gradually freezing tea in his cup. There had never been anything new under the starry sky. At this point, this conversation, this negotiation, could no longer continue. The demon lord asked, "What I don't understand is, since your ideas are so firm, why did you come to see me?" Chen Chongqing replied, "Because I want to know why you wanted to see me." The demon lord looked into his eyes and said, "Even if you are not willing to negotiate, we can still cooperate." Unable to negotiate, but able to cooperate, they were naturally targeting a third party. This was also what Chen Chongqing had been most confused about before coming here. The current situation was that the demi-humans had already decided to ally with Xuelao City, so their target was naturally the human race. What did the demon lord mean by cooperation? Did he feel that Madame Mu could no longer control the situation? Would the demi-humans ultimately maintain their alliance with the human race? If this really was the case, what reason did Chen Chongqing have to cooperate with him? The situation has changed. The demon lord raised his head to the plummeting snow and said, "On that night 4 days ago, the entire flavor of White Emperor City changed." Chen Chongqing knew what he was talking about and replied, "I don't need to feel uneasy." The demon lord shook his head. "I don't know what the White Emperor is thinking, and neither do you." Chen Chongqing noticed that he was speaking of the White Emperor, not Madame Mu. The demon lord said, "I've always suspected that the White Emperor was pretending to be asleep." Chen Chongqing was quiet for a while, then said, "It's also possible that something really did happen to him." The demon lord mocked, "Is it your habit to think the worst of everything?" Chen Chongqing replied, "I'm just thinking on the bright side." The two of them understood each other's meaning. The demon lord replied, "You're too naive. Anyone who underestimates the White Emperor will be punished, even my mighty father." Chen Chongqing asked, "If the White Emperor wasn't heavily injured and imprisoned, what was he trying to do by hiding it from the world?" The demon lord replied, "Of course it's to sit on the mountaintop and watch the tigers fight. Don't forget, he has always been the world's most tyrannical tiger, callous and ruthless." Chen Chongqing said, "You seem to be afraid of him. Old people are scary. They smell rotten." A look of disgust appeared on the demon lord's face, as if he really had smelled something unpleasant. Chen Chongqing said, "What does this have to do with me?" The demon lord looked into his eyes and said, "We are all carrying a heavy shell on our backs, crawling forward step by step. This is very tiring." Chen Chongqing remained silent. The demon lord's eyes deepened. "How about we help each other and lift off that heavy shell?" Chen Chongqing quietly looked at him and said, "You want me to kill my teacher? So what? I even killed my father, and that teacher of yours has always been a madman." A strange expression appeared on the demon lord's face. "I just don't understand. Why does he find you so unpleasing to the eye?" Chen Chongqing did not explain. This was a problem between him and Shang Xingzhou, not something that outsiders could understand. "It's impossible for you to kill Shang Xingzhou by yourself," the demon lord said. "I can help you. Once all those old scoundrels are dead, we can fight again. Wouldn't that be delightful?" Chen Chongqing replied, "In my fight with my teacher, the demons will benefit the most." The demon lord said, "I understand what you mean, so before that, I will also express my sincerity." Even though Chen Chongqing had no such thoughts, he couldn't help but be shocked speechless at these words. In the snowy plains of the northern demon realm, just who could be mentioned in the same breath as Shang Xingzhou? Chen Chongqing had never imagined that the demon lord had actually been preparing to fall out with the person who had assisted him in his ascension to the throne, the person who had done the greatest service, even his teacher. He had not imagined it, and he naturally found it hard to believe. These emotions appeared in his eyes. The demon lord knew that this was truly very difficult to convince, but he could not give a reason. If you agree, I will naturally not fight with you over Su Yorong and that female student of yours. I can even give my sister to you. The demon lord smiled at Chen Chongqing. In any case, she will always be with you. Chen Chongqing still found it impossible to understand. Just what do you want? The demon lord replied, I've already said what I want. If you make up your mind in the future, there is no harm in telling me in a letter. Chen Chongqing asked, a letter? The demon lord replied, in the past, Grand Scholar Tungus and the Pope of your generation often exchanged letters. We can also imitate them. Chen Chongqing thought this over, then said, if we can both leave White Emperor City alive, I will give you a letter. Yes, survival was the prerequisite for everything. Putting aside the many dangers hidden in White Emperor City, they were both the greatest threats to each other. No matter how much peace talks, cooperation, assistance, or even friendship had been mentioned in this conversation, if they had the chance, they would not hesitate to kill each other. Like this moment when the conversation ended. Snow incessantly fell. The only tree in the courtyard had already turned white. The only color came from the small clay stove. Because the stove and the teapot were hot, and for some reason, the water in the teapot had never boiled dry. Chen Chongqing and the demon lord said no more. They quietly sat for a very long time, gradually becoming two snowmen. Outside the courtyard were countless snowmen. Furthest away were the leaders of the demi-human tribes, as well as a few valiant experts. On the carriageway near the stone wall were several hundred Xiong clan suicide soldiers, led by Xiong Qiu, warily watching the area ahead. The Xiong clan leader stood at the very front, already a majestic snowy mountain. But he was not the closest to the courtyard. Closest to the courtyard were 5 carriages, the Archbishop of the Western Wastes and the priests standing behind the carriages, all of them extremely respectful. Besides the 5 carriages, there was also a group of people standing in the snow outside the courtyard. These people included government laborers, a girl selling cosmetics, a fortune-teller, an old man selling sesame candy, and a blind zither player. The Xiong clan leader stared at the blind zither player, his expression extremely solemn. As one of the strongest experts of the demi-human race, he, who was already half a step from the divine, could not even see through this blind zither player? And just who were the people in those 5 carriages? To be continued. Chapter 192. White Emperor City had snowed for half the night and an entire day. All the streets and alleys had turned white, and the people standing motionless outside the courtyards had long since become snowmen. Only, from time to time, hot air would spurt out from their snow-covered mouths and noses. It was a rather strange sight. Countless gazes fell on this courtyard, wanting to know what the demon lord and Chen Chongqing were discussing. If they could not come to an agreement, when would they strike? Luoluo stood by the window, quietly watching the snow. She did not know what was being discussed in the courtyard, but she knew that her teacher would not agree to anything. Madame Mu was also looking at the small courtyard in the snow. She had the same opinion as Luoluo, so she was waiting to see who would strike first. The gate to the courtyard was tightly shut. No sound came out, only the flapping of snow against the stone walls. The ground was covered in white snow, transforming into that snowy plain outside Xuelao City. The sole branch of that tree was covered in snow, like countless white pillars. Chen Chongqing and the demon lord quietly sat in the snow. Just a moment ago, they had been sincerely conversing, discussing cooperation and possible friendship. They had even said that if they could both leave Xuelao City alive, they should maintain correspondence. But now, the situation had become extremely dangerous. It seemed like they could strike at any moment, using their most powerful techniques to reap the other's life. This change was extremely sudden, so sudden that anyone other than the two involved would find it absurd. It was just that no one had seen it. Chen Chongsheng and the Demon Lord did not find this change absurd, because from the very start, from the observation platform to this place, they had always wanted to kill each other. Whether it was negotiations or conversations, they were all minor matters aside from killing each other. And they both had the ability to kill each other. On the observation platform, Chen Chongsheng had used the South Stream Temple sword array to break the Demon Lord's technique, but he had not continued to attack. This was because Madame Mu had summoned all the clouds in the city to stop him, and also because he had vaguely sensed danger. The Demon Lord was probably hiding a method in his sleeve that could kill him, though he did not know what it was. The Demon Lord had a better understanding of Chen Chongsheng's strength and methods, but he was not confident, especially when the 5 carriages arrived outside the courtyard. He looked into Chen Chongsheng's eyes and said, "Shang Xingzhou cannot come, nor can Wang Po, so who will come today?" Chen Chongsheng said, "Since that's the case, Black Robe and the Demon Commander won't be able to come. Even if the 8 great mountain men are still alive, they probably won't be able to come." They had already discussed this issue on the observation deck. At this time, they said these 2 sentences again because they had already decided to give up, but they were a little reluctant, so they wanted to make one last confirmation. After saying this, Chen Chongsheng and the Demon Lord fell silent for a very long time, and then they sighed at the same time. These 2 sighs that represented giving up were filled with regret. Today, the wind and snow were extremely strong. The opportunity was too good. The Demon Lord was far away from Shuilao City, and the Pope was far away in a foreign land. This sort of situation was far too rare, and it would probably be very difficult to see it again in the future. How could he not be disappointed that he was unable to kill the other party today? Come to think of it, killing you won't do me much good. The human race will become more united and angry. The Demon Lord looked at Chen Chongsheng and sighed. From this perspective, your existence is truly meaningless. The corner of Chen Chongsheng's lips lifted slightly, revealing a smile like the spring breeze, and said, "I'm used to it." From the moment he was born, his existence had been a scheme aimed at the Tianhai Divine Empress. His existence had never had any meaning. To put it another way, he should never have appeared in this world. But he was currently searching, and it could be said that he had already found it. The Demon Lord slightly tilted his head. Seeing the smile on Chen Chongsheng's face and confirming that it was not forced, he arched his brows. "You truly are a monster." Chen Chongsheng had received many evaluations, the vast majority of them very positive. Fresh, clean, persistent, genius. Even his enemies would at most say that he was a little slow, too stubborn, or question his unwisdom in handling his relationship with Shang Xingzhou. But this was the first time he had been considered a monster. Chen Chongsheng was not angry. On the contrary, he found the Demon Lord's view very interesting, somewhat close to what he believed to be true. As the saying went, the person that understood you the most was not your friend, but your opponent. Thus, the Demon Lord might be his true opponent. As he thought of these things, he took up the cup of tea that was almost frozen and poured it onto the snow in front of him. This was a memorial to those people who had died to the Demon Wolf Cavalry. He was a guest, so he should be the one to take his leave. He stood up, brushed off the snow on his body, nodded to the Demon Lord, and walked out of the courtyard. As he watched his back, the Demon Lord suddenly said, "The White Emperor will definitely be very disappointed." Chen Chongsheng stopped and asked, "Why not Madame Mu?" The Demon Lord replied, "Since you are not willing to cooperate with me, Madame Mu is my firmest supporter." Chen Chongsheng was quiet for a while, then asked, "Just what does Madame Mu want to do?" The great Western continent's imperial clan has always prided itself on being orthodox, and her line even has the blood of the elf race. Do you think that she will like humans? The Demon Lord sighed. And she's an Aquarius. Who knows what she's thinking? Chen Chongsheng knew that the Demon Lord was speaking of the constellations popular in Shuilao City, but he had no idea what Aquarius signified. He shook his head in confusion and continued walking out of the courtyard. The demon lord's hand slowly caressed the two cold stone statues in his sleeve, a hint of loathing appearing on his brow. He then turned to that perfectly straight footprint in the snow that seemed to have been measured with a ruler and muttered to himself, "They actually moved the entire palace over. They're truly afraid of death." With a creak and a few snowflakes falling, Chen Chongqing pushed open the gate and walked out. This sound and sight quickly spread to all of White Emperor City. The majority of people felt much more relaxed, but a few people felt very disappointed, shocked, confused, and all sorts of other emotions. People began to descend from the 5 carriages. Taoist Siyuan of the Hall of Subjugation, Archbishop Anlin of the Divine Edict, Linghai Jiwang of the Hall of Heavenly Judgment, the newly appointed Archbishop of the Hall of Announcements, who 32. Of the 5 prefects of the Orthodoxy, other than Mao Qiyu, who had remained behind to guard the Li Palace, the other 4 had all rushed to White Emperor City, tens of thousands of li away, each carrying a precious treasure. Chen Chongqing first solemnly bowed to the blind zither player, and then he spoke to Linghai Jiwang and the others. The azure curtain was slightly lifted, shaking off the snow. An elegant and handsome young master walked out from the last carriage. It was Tang 36. In his right hand was a seemingly inconspicuous short staff. Chen Chongqing was about to say something to him, but Tang 36 threw the short cane at him. Linghai Jiwang's complexion turned extremely unsightly at this sight, and Anlin couldn't help but softly exclaim. That unremarkable staff was the Orthodoxy's divine staff. If not for Chen Chongqing's quick reaction, it would have fallen into the snow. What if it was broken? Tang 36 acted like he did not see the gazes of Linghai Jiwang and the others. He angrily said, "In the future, don't always make me do this sort of thing." In order to break the seal of the Red River, the Orthodoxy's divine staff had been completely drained of the energy of light. In the last few days, it had been receiving sustenance in the Taoist Church of the Western Waste. Today, Chen Chongqing was going to meet with the Demon Lord, so he had to make thorough preparations. The only person he could trust and was qualified to wield the staff was Tang 36. Even if Linghai Jiwang and the others found Tang 36 to be an eyesore, they could not deny it. Because Tang 36 had done this sort of thing before. The person who had received the divine staff from the Pope had never been Chen Chongqing, but him. To be continued. Chapter 193. In the battle over the Bridge of Helplessness, Chen Chongqing had narrowly defeated Su Yorong, thus confirming his position as successor to the Orthodoxy. But that night, he did not go to the Light Palace. Instead, he went to Fortune Peace Road to eat beef ribs with Su Yorong. Under countless shocked gazes, the person who raised his hand to ask for leave for him was Tang 36. The one who had lowered his head to receive the divine staff that represented the authority of the Orthodoxy was also Tang 36. Today, it was still Tang 36 who was using the divine staff to control the Li Palace's array and lock onto the courtyard full of snow. This kind of pressure was too great. Even someone like Tang 36 didn't want to experience it again. Chen Chongqing looked at him and smiled. He turned around and looked at the courtyard in the wind and snow. His smile gradually disappeared. The gathering of the halls in White Emperor City was tantamount to moving the Li Palace's grand array over. If the Demon Lord had attacked earlier, he really would have taken the risk and tried to kill him. Regrettably, but also perhaps rejoicing, the Demon Lord had not intervened. Based on the current situation, Madame Mu would not give them another chance like today. If he and the Demon Lord could both safely leave White Emperor City, then, "There's something that I need your help with," he said to Tang 36. Tang 36's expression changed slightly and asked, "What is it?" Chen Chongqing said, "Help me write a few letters." Tang 36 didn't understand what letter he wanted him to write. Suddenly, he thought of a possibility and his expression became very interesting. "A love letter? Even though your literary talent isn't as good as mine, Why do you need to learn from those foolish youths? Could it be that you want to write to Princess Luoluo and are afraid that the holy maiden will see it? Chen Chongsheng wanted to explain, but in the end, he could only shake his head helplessly. Tang 36 had only arrived at White Emperor City this morning. Because he had come in such a hurry, he did not bring too many of the Tang family's subordinates. He only brought 5 kind man. It was the 5 kind man from Wenshui City a few days ago. In the struggle between Shang Xingzhou and Chen Chongsheng, the Tang old master was still biased toward the former, but when it came to major matters related to the demon race, his response was extremely clear. As long as Chen Chongsheng needed something, he would provide it. The people of the orthodoxy had also arrived in the wee hours of the morning. Chen Chongsheng had known of this matter the entire time, so when the demon lord invited him to meet, he had set the meeting today. The Tang old master had sent his strongest force, and the Li Palace had sent even more. It could even be described as vast and mighty. After Hu 32 brought back Chen Chongsheng's decree, Daoist Siyuan set out from the Li Palace that very night. Along the way, he rendezvoused with Linghai Jiwang and Enlin and led the 7,000 orthodoxy cavalry from the Mount Song Army headquarters to the western plains. After passing through the Tsong Province Army headquarters, they met up with the Bear tribe and quietly entered the Red River region. The 7,000 papal cavalrymen were currently hidden in the mountains on the other side of the river. Although they could not shake the overall situation of the demi-humans, they could still serve as a form of intimidation. As for the 4 archbishops who carried the treasures of the Li Palace with them, they were a valiant force that no one could ignore. With the expulsion of Mu Jiushi and the execution of Daoist Baisher, the 6 prefects of the orthodoxy had been replaced with the upper Hu 32, leaving 5. 4 of them had left the capital and come to White Emperor City, tens of thousands of li away. Mao Chuyu had not come. Many people believed that this prefect of the orthodoxy with the highest cultivation level had not come because he had to guard the Li Palace. However, Chen Chongsheng knew that this was not the case. It was because Mao Chuyu was in seclusion, waiting for the heavenly secrets that would allow him to break into the divine. The matter of White Emperor City was naturally extremely important, and the safety of the Pope was of the utmost importance. However, in Chen Chongsheng's view, Mao Chuyu was at an important moment. Whether or not he could be disturbed by external forces and successfully enter the divine domain were equally important matters. He turned to Linghai Jiwang and asked, "Who is standing guard for Principal Mao?" The Heavenly Tao Academy is temporarily managed by Daoist Shu Xian. Zhuang Jihuan has been living in the Li Palace this entire time. Linghai Jiwang added, "Besides them, the Archbishop of the Temple Seminary and several senior sisters of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green have also been at his side." Zhuang Jihuan had been born in poverty, but because he had received financial aid for his studies, he had always been close to the Wenshui Tangs. After serving as Mao Chuyu's deputy for many years, he had finally become the principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy several years ago. Whether it was in terms of cultivation, strength, insight, or methods, they were all extraordinary. With him personally standing guard for Mao Chuyu and those similarly powerful figures of the 6 Ivies, Chen Chongsheng logically had nothing to worry about. However, when he thought of Zhuang Jihuan's son, he couldn't help but have a rather strange expression. Everyone present knew of the story of the Garden of Zhou and Zhuang Huanyu's tragic suicide by the well, so they understood Chen Chongsheng's worries. Linghai Jiwang glanced at Daoist Siyuan, but Daoist Siyuan pretended not to see. Enlin felt very helpless. She stepped forward and said to Chen Chongsheng, "Before leaving, the venerable Daoist issued a decree ordering the Prince of Xiang to take charge of this matter." Chen Chongsheng was at first surprised at these words, but then he came to his senses and said no more. It was obvious that his teacher would not do anything in the current situation, so having the Prince of Xiang take charge of this matter was probably to reassure him. Linghai Jiwang and Daoist Siyuan seemed to have different thoughts. Chen Chongxing asked, "What's wrong?" Daoist Siyuan explained, "Before priest Xian went to Fengyang City, he met with a Taoist from the Monastery of Eternal Spring." Chen Chongxing fell silent. Priest Xian had gone to Fengyang City and died there. This was to make Biyanghong and Wuqiong believe that the person who killed their son was Chen Chongxing. "Master, do you really want me to die so badly?" Chen Chongxing could no longer remember how many times he had thought of this question since the coup of the Mausoleum of Books. The situation had changed, and both the imperial court and Shang Xingzhou were placing their hopes on him to do something in White Emperor City. But who knew how deep this obsession ran? Linghai Jiwang said with a gloomy expression, "At this crucial moment, if someone stabs a knife in the back, it will be very difficult to deal with." The orthodoxy possessed an unimaginable reserve and hidden strength. Even if Chen Chongxing brought the entire Li Palace to White Emperor City, it still wouldn't matter. But if Shang Xingzhou did not want to see the orthodoxy gain another expert of the divine domain, who could stop him? Chen Chongxing indicated that there was no need to discuss this matter any further. Linghai Jiwang and Daoist Siyuan were a little surprised, but they said no more. After traveling tens of thousands of li and enduring a long period of pressure outside the Snow Wind Academy, the people of the Orthodoxy and Tang 36 were extremely tired, but they couldn't rest yet because Chen Chongxing needed their opinions on a certain matter. The Taoist church became very quiet. Ever since the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, the return of the human race's divine domain experts to the Sea of Stars had become a very common occurrence in the last few years. But in the end, this was an internal struggle of the human race, and Biyanghong and Wuqiong had died at the hands of a foreign race. Linghai Jiwang declared, "Madame Mu must die." Not even the prefects of the orthodoxy had the right to speak about the life and death of a saint. In the past, this could have been called wild speculation. But he had said this, and the crowd was very calm. Because in their view, this was a matter of course. To be continued. Chapter 194. Daoist Siyuan and Enlin said nothing, but they clearly supported Linghai Jiwang, who 32 sighed and said, "It's not easy to kill, but it still has to be killed." Tang 36 turned to Chen Chongxing. He had no opinion on this matter, so he wanted to see what Chen Chongxing thought. Chen Chongxing thought for a while, then nodded. The matter was decided. The people in the Taoist church might not be able to kill Madame Mu, but Madame Mu had to die one day. Because this was the will of the Li Palace, the will of the human race. Chen Chongxing had once said to Luoluo that the demi-human race had to pay a sufficient price for the deaths of Biyanghong and Wuqiong Bai. He had not said it clearly at the time, but Luoluo knew what he meant. Madame Mu's death. No one was willing to die, much less a saint, even if she was the constellation of Aquarius that the demon lord spoke of, her spiritual world different from the rest. So Chen Chongxing could not understand why Madame Mu had suddenly stopped on that night 4 days ago and not killed him. If that strength that flowed through the streets of White Emperor City like an undercurrent and intimidated the countless tribes along the 2 shores of the Red River did not come from Xuelao City, then where did it come from? Chen Chongxing gazed thoughtfully at the night sky outside the hall. The wind and snow had already stopped. There were no clouds in the night sky, and one could clearly see the many stars. Was it snowing in that mountain range to the north that was also illuminated by the many stars? Even if it was not snowing, the ice and snow accumulated on those mountains were probably cold enough. Why was that mountain range called the Starfall Mountains? Countless years ago, the heavenly tomes fell in the heart of the continent while streams of fire spread everywhere. There were many in Mount Han, but were there also many here? If the Starfall Mountains were dug up, would they see the remains of stars, or would they see nothing? In a certain building deep within the imperial city, there was a pot of golden-threaded sculpture from Xuelao City. Madame Mu calmly gazed at it, her expression very calm. It was like she did not care what had happened in today's snowstorm, or perhaps nothing had happened at all. This is the most famous work of my race's master Gasso from 400 years ago. The demon lord walked in from outside the hall and said, I didn't expect that it had always been in Sir's hands. It is indeed art. Unfortunately, there are not many people in this city who can appreciate it with me. Madame Mu drew back her gaze from the complex lines of the carving that seemed to contain the infinite beauty of the starry sky. She turned to the demon lord and said, His Majesty also does not seem interested. The demon lord smiled. What do you want to say? Madame Mu calmly asked, Why has His Majesty not moved today? The demon lord said, I didn't think that Chen Chongqing would be so afraid of death that he actually moved the entire palace over. Madame Mu indifferently asked, Has your Majesty lost confidence because of this? The demon lord calmly gazed at her. A few days ago, on the observation platform, you stopped me from acting. Why are you advising me now? Madame Mu's voice became even lighter, as dull as the western sea when there was no wind. Times have changed. The demon lord's eyes suddenly turned deep and serene. 4 days ago, you also did not act. When was that? Madame Mu did not directly answer his question. If your Majesty acts today, I will naturally act as well. They both wanted Chen Chongqing to die, but in the end it was still a question of who would act first. Chen Chongqing was very difficult to kill. His cultivation level was even higher than rumored, and even more troublesome was that he had moved the entire palace over. With the cultivation levels of those prefects of the orthodoxy and the precious treasures they carried with them, even Madame Mu found it rather troublesome. Back in the palace, she had clearly sensed the killing intent formed from the laws of the world. And now, more and more demi-human personages and ordinary people in White Emperor City were standing on Chen Chongqing's side. There was not a single cloud in the night sky, the countless stars shining brightly. The wind blowing from the other side of the sea was also unhindered and rather strong. The sea breeze traveled through the halls and stone platforms, ultimately arriving in front of her. Madame Mu smelled the salty scent of the wind and that familiar dampness, but she did not miss it. The sea breeze could too easily turn living creatures into lifeless salted fish, and the damp air could easily become sticky, bringing with it a great deal of pressure. A hint of exhaustion appeared in her eyes as she said, Then let's wait a little longer. Just what is my lady waiting for? The demon lord slightly arched his brows at her. Waiting for them to dig up that mountain and see if that person is dead or not. To be able to obtain the loyalty of Black Robe and the demon commander, to force his mighty father into the abyss, to be able to obtain the fervent worship of all the inhabitants of the snowy plains of the land of demons in a few short years. The young Chen Chongqing naturally did not lack intelligence, but he now realized that he was finding it harder and harder to understand just what Madame Mu was thinking. Madame Mu indifferently said, At this time, I don't even know what I want to see. The demon lord stared into her eyes and said, Isn't what you should be doing now stopping them? Madame Mu asked, Why? The demon lord suddenly felt that he had made a mistake. No one in the world could control or even understand an Aquarius woman. Madame Mu did not know what he was thinking, but she calmly looked to the north. She truly did not know what sort of answer she wanted to wait for, but she was sure that she wanted to wait for an answer. Whether he was alive or dead. Before going to the Starfall Mountains, Chen Chongqing had once thought that as long as there was an answer, it was not good. And then he saw the black cliff, the unbreakable seal. He saw no answer, no truth. This was the best result. But in the end, there could only be one truth. The answer would be revealed sooner or later, and he had already vaguely guessed at it. This made his mood rather gloomy, especially when he thought about Luo Luo, who was still in the imperial city, hoping that he could rescue the White Emperor. The vast sky of stars had already retreated, revealing the morning light, which was then shattered by countless even brighter sword glows. Like the corpses of fireflies, they drifted down to the black cliff. Chen Chongqing sat cross-legged in front of the black cliff, his sheath across his knees. Today, he did not close his eyes to meditate. Instead, he calmly gazed at the black cliff as if he wanted to see through it. Several hundred famed swords from the previous generation of the Garden of Zhou, with his body as the source, incessantly slashed at the black cliff, but they did not truly strike at the black cliff's strength. Instead, near, far, on the lake, on the summit, they tempered themselves against the invisible seal, just like they had in the past few days. The seal that had originated from the same source as the Tong Palace was now much weaker, no longer possessing its former might. Correspondingly, the momentum of the swords was even more extraordinary. According to their respective positions, they formed the South Stream Temple sword array and slowly but inexorably crushed forward. The Starfall Mountains were filled with awe-inspiring sword intents. At a casual glance, one could see a dazzling sword glow. Daoist Siyuan had once visited Mount Li, and when he saw this sight, he couldn't help but recall the famous myriad sword array. Besides Daoist Siyuan, Linghai Jiwang and the other prefects of the Orthodoxy, as well as Wenshui City's five kind man, were all standing guard at Chen Chongqing's side. The Bear tribe, the Shi clan, and several other large clans had dispatched their bravest and strongest warriors to take control of the area around the Black Cliff. Several hundred demi-human experts had gathered in the mountain range with a circumference of several li experts on the level of Jin Yulu and Xiaoda numbered tensum. Even farther away, on the other side of the lake, dust was rising and the roars of monsters could occasionally be heard. The armies of the various tribes had probably already taken control of all the valleys. The situation had long since become clear, regardless of whether the ministers, generals, and tribal leaders of the demi-human court believed it or not. The truth would very quickly appear before their eyes. To be continued. Chapter 195. Countless gazes fell on the black cliff, on Chen Chongqing's body, but no one dared to speak, much less disturb him. Linghai Jiwang had made it very clear that anyone who dared to take a single step closer to the Black Cliff would be regarded as an assassin. The Prime Minister and the Shi clan leader glanced at each other. There was no joy in their eyes, only worry and unease. They were worried because no one knew what they would see once Chen Chongqing opened the Black Cliff. If it was the worst result, what would they do? Would the demon generals, ministers, and tribes who supported them kneel before the Empress again in a very short time? They were uneasy for two reasons. As the largest and strongest tribe of the demi-human race, why had the Xiong clan still chosen to support Madame Mu? And why had Madame Mu not done anything to stop all this, only quietly watched as they broke the array? Not everyone had gone to the Starfall Mountains. In that courtyard covered in yellow sand, the young demon lord calmly gazed at the stone statues that had at some point reappeared on the two sides of the back gate, his thoughts a mystery. In a nearby manor, the Xiong clan leader looked at his son and hesitated for a very long time, but in the end, he said nothing. In the stone hall at the highest point of the imperial city, Luo sat by the window, silently waiting for something. In a quagmire in the deepest part of the mountains, Chusu's head was lowered as he licked the wound on his severed arm, his entire body trembling in pain. In the small courtyard next to the temple to the celestial tree, Xianyuan Pe sat on the floor of the veranda, staring blankly at the mound in the ground. In a very ordinary inn, Su Yorong, who had not slept all night, used cold water to wash her face. She sat in front of the table and began to comb her hair in front of the bronze mirror. A voice brimming with emotion came out of the mirror. "Since we are still beneath the starry sky, how can we not see all living beings?" On the lake, in the clouds, on the summit, countless sword glows suddenly vanished at the same time. A moment later, there was a shrill whistle through the air. Countless sword glows returned to the sheath. Chen Chongqing gripped the middle of the sheath and stood up. Everyone turned to look at him. But he looked at the lake, the clouds, the summit. The sword had returned, but the sword intent was still there. A flock of geese flew past the snowy peak, and suddenly began to descend. A gust of sea breeze blew from the mountains, but it was cut into pieces. A few wisps of clouds in the blue sky were torn into thin threads by an invisible force, and then gradually disappeared. These were all signs of the restriction collapsing. After confirming this, Chen Chongqing once again looked at the black cliff in front of him. There was a loud bang. Countless muffled noises came from the depths of the black cliff and even the depths of the ground. The earth was shaking uneasily, and countless waves were stirred up in the lake. Countless snowflakes were pouring down from a nearby snowy peak, and the roars of the beasts in the mountains became shrill. Rubble flew everywhere, and smoke and dust rose. It took a long time before it gradually calmed down. The black cliff had already disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a large pit that was hundreds of feet wide. In the deepest part of the cave, there was an extremely smooth stone wall that looked like gold or jade. It was as if even the sharpest sword would not be able to leave a mark on it. This was the legendary star stone, which possessed an unimaginable weight and density. However, it had already been buried by the soil and sand, and only a small part of it was exposed. Starting from the star stone, there was a perfectly straight stone path. The pit that had been the black cliff for hundreds of feet had been cut in two by this stone path. This stone path was extremely long, extending for who knew how many li, extending into the distance. Countless gazes followed the path of the stone path, ultimately stopping 10 some li away. There, half of a mountain had collapsed. This mountain had originally been a palace. A stone chair had been embedded in this half of the mountain. This stone chair was 100 feet tall and 100 feet wide. It was incomparably massive and exaggerated. There was a person sitting on the stone chair. This person was dressed in a pure white imperial robe. He was extremely thin and his eyes were sunken in. He seemed like a dead person. "Your Majesty!" There was a cry of alarm, and then countless cries of alarm. And then there were the sounds of rushing wind. Countless silhouettes scrambled to rush toward the half-mountain that was more than 10 miles away. Ling Haijiwang's warning had long ago been completely forgotten. When they arrived in front of the massive stone chair, they felt that the person in the chair was even more small, even somewhat comical. But the demi-human ministers and experts had no such thoughts. Their faces were filled with excitement, and some of them even began to cry. To them, the person in the chair was a god. Even if that person was extremely thin, his eyes closed, on the verge of death, incredibly weak. But as long as he was alive, no, even if he was dead, he would still be the god of the entire demi-human race. Because he was called by Xingyan. He was the White Emperor. It was clear that the important personages of the demi-human race had long since prepared for this sight. Several demi-human doctors were carried onto the stone chair by the black vultures and began to treat the White Emperor. Seeing that the White Emperor's eyes were still tightly shut, Xiaota felt somewhat anxious and asked, "Where is His Holiness the Pope?" Everyone knew that Chen Chongqing's medical skill could be said to be unparalleled in the world. In their view, no matter how skilled these demi-human doctors were, they were still far from being able to compare to Chen Chongqing. The Prime Minister and the others turned their heads and froze. They did not see Chen Chongqing. Chen Chongqing was still 10 some li away. He was at the original position of the black cliff. Seeing the activity in the distance, Chen Chongqing suddenly said, "Let's go." As he said this word, his gaze was still fixed on the massive stone chair, on the White Emperor's face. This was his first time seeing the White Emperor, and he had spent many days and nights on it with great difficulty. But the moment he saw the White Emperor, he decided to leave. Immediately leave. Hearing Chen Chongqing's words, everyone was shocked and did not understand why. Only the blind zither player seemed to understand Chen Chongqing's meaning. He led 5 kind men to the exit of the secret path behind the lake. Just when an elderly demi-human doctor gathered his courage and prepared to place the stone needle in his hand, the White Emperor opened his eyes. His eyes were very gloomy. They were like the snowy plains on a cloudy day. Incomparably gray. Then, a small black dot appeared on the snowy plains. The black dot gradually grew larger, its color deepening. It was like a traveler traveling 10,000 li across the snowy plains, getting closer and closer. He had truly awoken. Perhaps because he had been sealed for 5 years, the star stone had absorbed a great deal of star radiance and demi-human essence. He was extremely weak, on the verge of death. But when he opened his eyes, an unimaginably dignified aura exuded from his thin and weak body. "You've all come?" His voice was very soft. Because he had not drunk water for many years, it was rather hoarse. But all of the Starfall Mountains could hear his voice. The demi-human experts knelt like a tide. To be continued.